Why can't I control my mouth? Why can't I control my mouth? Hagrid had meant to be grateful. He really had. Sherlock had pointed out there was more than one way to handle the problem Hagrid was facing, and Hagrid had instinctively started to thank him. The words tumbled out, and then he froze. Wait, have I said something out loud? He blurted, staring at Sherlock as if the boy had performed some kind of magic. Sherlock simply raised an eyebrow. Hagrid had only sent an owl to say he needed to talk. Sherlock had arrived, had a cup of tea, and been sitting in the hut for perhaps 5 minutes. How had he known Hagrid was in trouble? The answer, Sherlock decided, was painfully simple. Hagrid did not conceal things well. If other people's secrets required observation and deduction, Hagrid wore his on his face and in his actions. He didn't even need to think to give himself away. You're troubled about the dragon egg. Sherlock said bluntly, I have 3 suggestions. First, tell Professor Dumbledore, he'll handle it. Second, contact Charlie Weasley. He's a dragon specialist in Romania. Third, wait a moment, Hagrid interrupted, eyes huge. Merlin's beard. How? How did you know? What do you mean? Sherlock asked. You don't. Hagrid grabbed at himself helplessly. I didn't tell anyone I had a dragon egg. Sherlock watched him for a beat, and then, seeing that Hagrid was about to go in directions that would only rile him up further, laid out, as plainly as he could, what should have been obvious. If you don't want people to know, take those books out of sight. Dragon Species of Great Britain and Ireland, From Egg to Phoenix, Dragon Breeder's Guide, Dragon Breeding for Pleasure and Profit. Anyone who saw those would wonder. You've got the curtains drawn, the fire in the grate burning much hotter than you'd need for comfort, and from where I'm sitting I can see something in the fireplace. Only dragon eggs require that sort of incubation. Hagrid had not gotten around to hiding his books. Now his jaw dropped even further. Sherlock's gaze skittered to the hearth. The large, dark egg nestled there made Hagrid shiver. All right, Hagrid managed. I didn't expect you to see through me. That's amazing, Sherlock. He even changed the way he addressed him mid-sentence, startled into formality, which only made his fluster worse. What's your third idea? Hagrid rubbed his hands together like a child. Honestly, the first 2 ain't good enough. Sherlock could tell at a glance what Hagrid wanted. He wanted to raise the dragon himself. It was the kind of impulse Hagrid lived for, but in the wizarding world it was illegal for private individuals to rear dragons. The decree of 1709 forbade it. Sherlock sighed and steered the conversation. Tell me about the night you got the egg. Hagrid brightened. You're interested in how I came by it? To the egg and the person who gave it to you, Sherlock said. Hagrid told the story in an enthusiastic, halting rush, a trip to the Hog's Head, a drink, a stranger who wagered a dragon egg on a card game. The man never removed his cloak and lost. Hagrid had only seen his back. So you didn't see his face? Sherlock asked. No, he kept his cloak on. Lots of strange folk at the Hog's Head. That's the sort of place for them. That's true, Sherlock agreed, but not many people carry dragon eggs for wagering, and not many are as keen on magical creatures as you are. The fact such a man found you is interesting. Hagrid scratched his head and squinted. Sherlock, can you make that clearer? I'm not good at thinking too sharp. Sherlock gave a small, exasperated smile. Besides Baskerville, what did you say you set near the Philosopher's Stone? Not Baskerville, Fluffy, Hagrid cried out. He may look fierce, but he's as gentle as can be to me. Play him music, and he falls right to sleep. Dumbledore borrowed him, and he asked Professors Sprout, Flitwick, McGonagall, Quirrell, and I think Professor Snape to cast protective spells. And Dumbledore himself did, of course. Hagrid's expression suddenly went pale, and he slapped his own forehead. Why can't I control my mouth? Sherlock let the reaction pass. Hagrid had just listed, in a single breath, exactly who had set the defenses around the stone. It wasn't even necessary to work hard to see the inference. Sherlock had already verified the next deduction where it mattered most. Rubus, Hagrid, calm down. Dumbledore has told me about the protections, Sherlock said evenly. And the man who put the egg with you was Quirrell. Quirrell? Hagrid's voice rose to a scandalized squeak. He helped set the protections. He wouldn't gamble away a dragon egg. He might have had reason, Sherlock said. He didn't elaborate. He'd already checked with Dumbledore, and that was enough for the moment. Hagrid's eyes widened so far they looked like brass bells. Why, he wondered, did Dumbledore always tell Sherlock everything? Sherlock steered them back to the egg. Third solution, he said coolly. Give the egg to me. Give it to you? Hagrid looked as if the very suggestion was scandalous. Yes, I found a potion recipe in a restricted book that requires a dragon egg as an ingredient. I could brew the potion. Hagrid's arms went rigid. No, no, this is a life. It hasn't hatched, Sherlock said, shrugging. I'll pay you. Hagrid snapped to his feet so suddenly his chair toppled. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. He stamped a boot on the floor. I'd sooner go and tell Dumbledore I blabbed about Fluffy than let you use it to brew potions, Holmes. Sherlock shook his head, mock regret on his face. Hagrid took it as more proof of treachery and turned even redder. Later, in the Gryffindor common room, Ron was doubled over with laughter. My bloody hell, Sherlock, you're wicked. You tricked Hagrid into giving up the egg. It's underhanded, Hermione conceded, but she smiled. It's also effective. Dragons are too dangerous. Even Hagrid would struggle at taming a fully grown one. Charlie gets burned all the time. If you could see the marks. Harry looked worried. Sherlock, what if Hagrid changes his mind? He won't, Sherlock said, matter of fact. Wizards are negotiators by nature. If you tell Hagrid to send the egg away outright, he'll resist. But tell him you need it for a potion, and he'll compromise. He'll allow it to go where it'll be cared for. The three of them thought it over, and grudgingly agreed Sherlock had a point. Then Ron's face hardened with another, more practical worry. What about the Quidditch match against Hufflepuff? He demanded. Hermione and I reckon you shouldn't play, Harry. Why shouldn't he? Sherlock asked immediately. Because Professor Snape has insisted on refereeing. He's never done that before. He's only doing it because of Harry. Ron puffed up with righteous indignation. See, even Sherlock sides with me. You should just break your leg, Harry, and not play. Harry made a face that said very plainly, Dude, be reasonable. Sherlock ignored Ron's dramatics and looked at Harry instead. If Snape's going to be biased, then don't avoid the match. Think how you'll win it. Ron blinked, utterly stumped. What? What sort of plan is that? Chapter 82. Snape has a lot to think about. Harry had no objection to what Sherlock had said. Catching the golden snitch was his job. But Wood had warned him. Professor Snape, if anything, would find every reason to deduct Gryffindor points. Well said, Sherlock agreed, then offered a solution. We just need to catch the snitch before the gap between the teams grows to 150 points. Seeing Harry nod, Ron exploded. Wait, do you two even know what you're talking about? This is awful for Harry. Snape as referee is a disaster. Hermione, who'd been worried too, said, Ron is right. Even if Professor Snape wouldn't hurt Harry, he certainly won't want Gryffindor to win. Sherlock smiled faintly. Quidditch is like this. Harry, as seeker, only has to focus on the snitch. As the referee, Snape has a lot more to concern himself with. He has to ensure Harry's safety, yes, but he also has to find ways, within the rules, to take points from Gryffindor. That's a difficult balancing act for him. Hermione still found Sherlock's tone impossible. She had come to believe that Snape would protect Harry, and the idea that he would deliberately penalize Gryffindor was hard to reconcile. But Sherlock meant it. If Snape was referee, he had to weigh the school's interests and his own inclinations. That complicated everything. Not long after Snape was named referee for the second Quidditch match, Gryffindor faced Hufflepuff. Compared to the first match, the atmosphere was tense. Slytherin students were smug, Ravenclaws watched closely, and Gryffindors tried to appear nonchalant. Sherlock did not go to the Gryffindor changing room this time. Instead, Wood pulled Harry aside with last-minute instructions. Potter, I don't mean to put pressure on you, but we have to catch the snitch as fast as possible today. We can't give Snape time to favor Hufflepuff. Wood's face was pinched with worry. We must finish this quickly. We can't let him influence the match. Harry agreed. Everyone did. Even Sherlock, who had believed Snape would protect Harry, had said essentially the same thing. Get the match over before the score could be manipulated. Because of Harry's performance last time, the stands were fuller than ever. Almost the whole school, teachers included. Harry felt a pang of disappointment that Dumbledore wasn't there. If Dumbledore had been present, Quirrell wouldn't have dared anything. Sherlock had warned that with Voldemort's backing, Quirrell was a serious threat. Snape had volunteered to referee so he could intervene when necessary, but his ability to prevent point deductions was another matter. The whistle blew, and 15 brooms rose. Lee Jordan began his commentary with the usual flourish. Ladies and gentlemen, Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff. If Gryffindor wins this one, 2 wins in a row could put the House Cup back within reach. Jordan, Professor McGonagall snapped. Sorry, Professor, Jordan muttered, but his meaning got across. This match might be decided by the Seekers if the referee made fair calls. Gryffindor's tactic mirrored the last game. Harry hung back, waiting for the snitch and trying not to draw attention. Hufflepuff's players played cleanly, none of the obvious nastiness Gryffindor had seen from Slytherin before. Then Snape looked directly at Harry. Harry offered what he intended as a friendly smile. Snape turned away and promptly awarded Hufflepuff a penalty. George Weasley had supposedly sent a bludger toward the referee. Harry had the sinking feeling that the penalty was tied to him, and his suspicion was quickly confirmed. A minute later, Snape gave Hufflepuff another penalty, this time ruling that Angelina Johnson's flight path constituted a deliberate collision with the referee. The decision was absurd. Jordan, McGonagall warned in a low voice. Jordan recovered, trying to keep his professionalism. After those penalties, Hufflepuff lead has grown to 20 points. Gryffindor still has the quaffle, but they can only hope their seeker, Harry Potter, finds the golden snitch quickly. Otherwise, the Gryffindor section booed at the obvious bias. Many Quidditch calls are marginal, and Snape called every borderline play on Gryffindor against them while letting Hufflepuff's borderline plays go. The score crept upward in Hufflepuff's favor. Rain began, at first a drizzle that soon turned heavier. For the teams flying high above, the rain affected visibility and grip, but Snape did not stop the game. Wood kept shouting encouragement. It's just a little rain. We practiced in worse. Yeah, you'd better keep flying. You know George won't stop for a shower. George hurled a bludger toward Hufflepuff's seeker, grumbling as he did. The match and the stands were alive. Earlier, Sherlock had slipped out of the stands, leaving Hermione and Ron puzzled. Malfoy, seeing him go, was delighted and swaggered over with Crabbe and Goyle when the match began. He taunted Harry mercilessly. Ron, Neville, Dean, and Seamus answered in kind. Hermione stayed tense, whispering, "Harry, hurry up," fearful Quirrell would try something. As Snape's calls grew more outrageous, the tension in the stands boiled over. After another of Malfoy's jibes, Ron shouted, "You're only so cocky because Sherlock isn't here." Malfoy bristled. "I'm afraid of him? What a joke. He's just a muggle-born who got a lot of attention because he's clever." "If Sherlock were here, you wouldn't dare say a thing," Ron shot back. "If brains were gold, you'd be broke," Malfoy spat. Malfoy. Ron's ears went red. "Ron, don't let him. Oh my God, look." Hermione suddenly screamed. On the field, Harry, who had been hanging back, suddenly changed course and dived hard. Hufflepuff's seeker hadn't realized Harry had committed. The dive caught them off guard. "You're lucky, Weasley." Malfoy sneered. "Your mate clearly saw money on the ground." Before Malfoy could finish, Sherlock reappeared in the stands. Ron and Hermione both cheered. "Sherlock!" He glanced toward Malfoy and with a calm, almost bored movement addressed him. "You're lucky too, Mr. Malfoy." Then he glanced at Crabbe and Goyle. "Why don't you two go pick it up too?" Confronted by Sherlock's presence, Malfoy wavered. In the scramble that followed, Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle tumbled off their seats and into each other. The moment of distraction in the stands was enough. Above the pitch, Harry blasted past Snape on his Nimbus 2000. The rush of air caught the corner of Snape's black robes and made him frown. He was searching for a reason to call a foul, but he never had the chance. Harry skimmed up, grabbed the snitch, and stopped just inches from Snape. He raised his right hand, just as he had in the previous match, and the golden snitch was in his fist. The match was over. The stadium erupted. It was the fastest snitch capture in House Cup history. "We won! We won! Gryffindor won!" Hermione screamed, jumping on her seat and hugging Sherlock so hard he barely had room to breathe. Harry dropped off his broom a foot above the ground and landed beside Snape. Snape's face was tightly set, lips pressed thin. He looked anything but pleased. After remembering Snape's earlier decisions and his sour expression, Harry almost didn't speak. But thinking of the flower language Sherlock had taught him and the special Christmas gift he had been given, Harry decided to be polite and sincere. "Thank you, Professor," he said. Harry thanked Snape. Snape's expression immediately soured. "Ugh, how revolting to hear that from a Gryffindor," he sneered, then fixed Harry with a look that made the skin crawl. "Potter, did a troll bash your brains in, or did someone stuff a bezoar up there? I don't think what I just did is worth your thanks." No wonder Snape was so disliked. He had a talent for making people furious the moment he opened his mouth. Harry took a deep breath and repeated to himself, "He's protecting me," until he could swallow the urge to snap back. Snape blinked in surprise that Harry didn't retaliate, then glanced toward the stands with a gleeful curl to his mouth. "Too bad. Your detective friend and his troll companion look like they're in trouble." Harry followed Snape's gaze. The Quidditch match was over, but a fight had erupted in the stands. Rain beat down, souring the atmosphere. Malfoy lay curled in a muddy corner, his lips swollen from Sherlock's punch. Goyle and Crabbe were collapsed against the railing like a toppled human pyramid, too winded to keep fighting. Sherlock had moved too fast. The three hadn't even drawn their wands before they were floored. "Gryffindor savages!" hissed Pansy Parkinson, a first-year Slytherin, as she watched Malfoy's state. Pansy's shrill voice cut through the air, and a red jet of light shot from her wand. "Look out!" Hermione shouted, but Sherlock didn't seem to see it. He drew his wand slowly and aimed at Parkinson. "You started it, Petrificus Totalis." Pansy's charm had gone wide, striking only a nearby seat. Before she could try again, Sherlock's Petrificus hit her. Her limbs snapped together, and she fell stiff as a board. "Save Malfoy," someone cried. "Down with Holmes! Avenge Parkinson!" Sherlock knocked down 4 Slytherins in quick succession, and the rest of the little lions could no longer hold back. Someone raised a fist, and they surged forward. Ron, itching for a fight, drew his wand and yelled, "Brothers, let's go!" Seamus and Dean followed immediately. Neville hesitated, then charged. First years from both houses pulled wands and started flinging charms, but they quickly realized wand work wasn't very effective. First years hadn't learned many offensive spells. Fists and kicks did more damage. Most of them abandoned their wands and closed for brawling. Those who couldn't reach the front kept firing sporadic spells. In the crush, stray charms landed more often than anyone expected. Unlucky Neville took a silent loss when someone's leg locker curse struck him, though Hermione was quick to dispel it. She moved forward to help, but Seamus sent out some wild charm that exploded into the crowd, hitting both Slytherins and their own side. Hermione was forced into urgent healing work. "Seamus, put your wand away. Just go up and punch them," Ron shouted in the chaos. As the focal point, Sherlock drew the most attention. Nearly every little lion wanted to reach him, and as their most dangerous fighter, he hit harder than anyone else. When a snarling group surged toward him, he stayed calm and rational. First, distract the enemy. The first to rush in found their vision suddenly blocked as Neville's pet toad, Trevor, levitated and croaked wildly in midair. Sherlock had grabbed him and flung the charm just in time. Using the confusion, Sherlock landed a right hook to the cheek of the nearest boy, knocked out with one blow. "Despicable," Hermione called from behind, but Sherlock was already moving. He blocked a sneaking punch with his left elbow, then swung his right fist and sent another opponent sprawling. Step to the left, elbow backhand. Another Slytherin hit on the jaw. He hit the ribs, the gut, a knee into the diaphragm. One after another, Sherlock's blows landed fast and brutal. No one could take one of his punches and stay upright. The little lions, energized by such a powerful teammate, cheered as the fight turned into a rout. The older Slytherins could no longer ignore it. Percy Weasley's cold voice cut through the din. "Control your people, Miss Farley, or you'll be in a lot of trouble, mark my words." Gemma Farley, the Slytherin prefect, shot Percy a glare and surveyed her house members with disgust. They couldn't even beat their own year and were trying to bully first years? She had no patience for it. The rain intensified. Hermione was about to step forward and lash out at a few sneak attackers when she saw Professor McGonagall hurrying toward the stands. She put her wand away and cried out anxiously, "Stop! Don't fight anymore! You lot, stop this at once!" The rain poured as both Gryffindor and Slytherin students stared, incredulous. Was she mad? Had the downpour gotten to her? "Enough!" Professor McGonagall's voice snapped like steel, her shout carrying over the stands. All offensive magic stopped midair, and Sherlock's fist froze less than a foot from a young witch's face. Millicent Bulstrode recoiled. He'd struck a girl. No, he had struck a girl just now. McGonagall stood there, rain soaking her robes, but her expression stern enough to command absolute silence. She took in the mess of the stands, bruised and swollen Slytherins, cheering Gryffindors, Hermione desperately trying to mediate. Then her gaze settled on Sherlock. "Can someone tell me what happened?" she demanded. Percy Weasley and Gemma Farley stepped forward together and told their versions of events. McGonagall listened, then handed down swift judgment. Assaulting classmates is a serious offense. Gryffindor loses 50 points. Insulting classmates and deliberate provocation, Slytherin loses 10 points. Percy Weasley, Gemma Farley, both of you are prefects and failed to stop this from escalating. Both houses lose 10 points apiece. You are the worst class I have ever taught. Her voice was like quenched steel. Even the heavy rain couldn't put out the burning weight of it. "But Professor, Malfoy and the others provoked first," Hermione began. "Silence, Miss Granger. The one who started it was Mr. Holmes." Hermione went silent. "Mr. Holmes, for your egregious behavior, you will serve detention tomorrow night at 11. Report to the entrance hall and present yourself to Mr. Filch." Sherlock didn't defend himself. He had started the fight. McGonagall's verdict was fair, and it had been part of his plan. Most of the little lions were exhilarated, not dejected. Even the double punishment of lost house points plus detention didn't dampen them. Only Hermione looked stricken. Harry had helped win the Quidditch match for Gryffindor, but Sherlock had cost the house 60 points, a staggering blow to their House Cup chances. After the troll incident, Hermione had stopped caring so much about points. Now she worried for Sherlock. With 60 points lost, he would probably be ostracized. Sherlock wouldn't care, but Hermione knew how awful that felt. She had hoped to make up some points herself. She had been naive. What Hermione least expected was what happened when they returned to the Gryffindor common room. A wild celebration. Sherlock was treated like a hero rather than an outcast. Harry was cheered for breaking a record and winning on the Quidditch pitch. Ron was lauded for his verbal takedown of Malfoy. The Weasley twins had somehow procured a mountain of treats. Lee Jordan came up and gave Sherlock a thumbs up. "Holmes, Potter, Weasley, you've done Gryffindor proud," he called. "Well done," someone shouted. "Truly well done," another chimed in. 84, the birth of a king. Hermione could not make sense of the scene in the Gryffindor common room. Hadn't Sherlock just cost Gryffindor 60 points? And he was still going to detention. Why did nobody seem worried? There were even Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students in the crowd. Now she understood where the Weasley twins got their food from. If Hufflepuff was in attendance, there was no fear of a poor spread. Slytherin are disgusting. They always cheat behind the referee's back. In the last match, they fouled maliciously. Our chaser nearly got knocked off his broom. Exactly. I heard Marcus Flint has Korean blood. Really? No wonder. For a moment, Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff formed a single chorus of outrage aimed at Slytherin. A tall, handsome Hufflepuff even raised his butterbeer. "To Holmes, let's beat the despicable Slytherins. Cheers." Hermione's shock only grew. "You're drinking alcohol?" George Weasley grinned. Fred added, "It's only alcohol. Why do you look so surprised, Granger?" There was a reason the twins laughed. In Britain, the legal drinking age is 18, but children over 5 may drink under parental supervision. A Muggle-raised child like Sherlock had almost certainly been exposed to alcohol. Hermione wanted to protest, but the moment passed. George shouted at the top of his lungs, "Everyone, Holmes is our king!" "To the Lion King," Fred supplied. Harry and Ron exchanged a look and joined in the roar. "Lion King Holmes! Holmes is our king!" Neville, Seamus, Dean, and the rest took up the chant. Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs joined the din. The students Sherlock had helped most loudly celebrated. Hermione stood frozen, utterly bewildered. She couldn't fathom how things had turned out like this. Sherlock himself was a little surprised, too. Earlier, before the match began, he and Hagrid had been in the headmaster's office. Under the pretense of Holmes brewing the dragon egg into a potion, Hagrid at last admitted to Dumbledore how he'd come by the dragon egg. Once the story was clear, Quirrell's involvement was exposed, just as Sherlock had suspected. Handling a dragon egg was not something Dumbledore would find difficult. What mattered was Quirrell's deliberate approach to Hagrid and his attempts to extract information. Those actions had caught Dumbledore's attention. Hagrid had another reason for coming to Dumbledore. The Forbidden Forest had been uneasy lately. When Dumbledore asked who should investigate, Hagrid didn't hesitate. "Sir, you might not believe me. Every time I think about it, I'm amazed. When that little fellow saw me, he told me about my past. He even knew I'd got the Philosopher's Stone for you from Gringotts, and before I could say a thing, he knew I had a dragon egg. It's astonishing. I tell you, I thought he could read people's hearts like you." Dumbledore smiled, half amused and half pained. "Calm down, Rubus. I don't have that ability, and neither does Sherlock." He felt awkward. Even a wise headmaster wasn't sure how much to reveal. Hagrid's recommendation, however, was emphatic. Sherlock should investigate the Forbidden Forest. So Dumbledore called Sherlock in to ask his help. When Sherlock arrived and saw Hagrid in the office, he guessed what had happened at once. "Mr. Holmes," Dumbledore said, "Rubus has told me about the dragon egg. It seems Lord Voldemort cannot remain idle any longer." Evidently. Sherlock folded his hands beneath his chin and studied Dumbledore. "So, Professor, when do you plan to act?" "Not yet." Dumbledore met his eyes. "I need your help." "My help or Harry's? To be precise, yours." Dumbledore paused, then added with a hint of bitterness, "Sherlock, every time I see you, I cannot help thinking of an old friend." At that sigh, Sherlock's mind made the leap. The image of thick white woolen socks in the mirror of Erised came to him. Dumbledore's expression confirmed it. "You must mean someone who is very close to you, someone who has been tangled with you for most of your life," Sherlock said without hesitation. Dumbledore's features tightened. "I need you to go into the Forbidden Forest," Dumbledore said, avoiding the rest of the topic. "With your abilities, you'll uncover things others won't." Sherlock didn't press the matter. He was more interested in the phrasing. Leaning forward, eyes bright, he asked, "The truth?" "Hagrid will tell you what's been happening." Dumbledore hesitated. "But Quidditch starts soon, and you are still supposed to watch Harry's match. I'll arrange your detention as soon as I can, and then Hagrid can take you to patrol the forest." Sherlock smiled faintly. "That's too contrived." "What? You're arranging it too neatly," he said. "I'll find a way to get detention myself." He had one more thought he didn't voice. It would give him a reason to rough up his classmates without Dumbledore looking askance. Back in the common room, Sherlock watched the celebrating students and shook his head. Even with his skill at deduction, he was surprised by the scene. On reflection, though, the reaction made sense. Gryffindor had long been used to finishing low in the House Cup. Points came and went. What mattered to them now was pride. The fact that, under Sherlock's unintentional leadership, the first-year team had beaten Slytherin in public, and they'd won. That was exhilarating. Slytherin had held the cup for 6 years. Their defeat tasted sweet. Even Percy Weasley, usually rigid about rules and quick to scold, was smiling. "Holmes did well this time, but I think there was a—" he began. "Weasley prefect," someone cut in. "Don't spoil the mood." The tall Hufflepuff, who'd been drunk on victory, draped an arm around Percy and flashed a brilliant smile. "This is an honor, greater than the House Cup." "Cedric." Percy started to protest, but the twins swooped in, practically carrying him away on a makeshift stretcher. George grabbed Percy's head and shook it. "Don't be a buzzkill at a happy time." Fred exclaimed, "Look, Granger hasn't said a word." Hermione felt as if she'd been insulted and left speechless. The celebration in the common room went on long into the night. But the incident's ripple effects were not finished. The next day, as Sherlock left his dormitory, whispers trailed him like a shadow. "Over there, look, between Harry Potter and that red-haired boy. The tall one, did you see his face? His nose, did you see that nose?" Students lined up outside classrooms on tiptoe for a glimpse, craning back as they passed him. In the corridor, they would walk past and then turn to stare. Ron scowled. Harry, however, was delighted. He remembered what it had been like to be mobbed with curiosity when he first arrived. He'd been miserable then. Now someone else had that same attention. He could finally stand at the center and watch. Ron pouted, "Why are you Harry and I'm just the red-haired boy?" Sherlock ignored the stares. Harry and Ron didn't know that Sherlock had already endured far worse scrutiny at his Muggle school. Children there were even livelier and more vicious. Once his talent had shown, everyone wanted to know about the boy who seemed to know things simply by looking. Interest, however, didn't translate to friendship. A sharp tongue and aloofness made him an easy target for cruelty. Had he not been tough, he would have been bullied constantly. In that respect, Harry had always been luckier. He had friends, Sherlock, Ron, and Hermione, who stuck by him. Sherlock had been alone until now. Now Sherlock was no longer lonely. 85. You don't want Mrs. Norris. Evening astronomy at Hogwarts still meant standing out under the sky with telescopes. Lately, the class had been assigned to map Jupiter's movements and those of its moons. Sherlock disliked almost every subject at Hogwarts. Quirrell's defense against the dark arts was the worst, but astronomy came in a close second. It was, in his view, worse even than Professor Binns's endlessly dry history of magic. Professor Sinistra would drone on about the course's importance, cultivating scientific thinking and observation, sharpening concentration, arousing curiosity, aiding divination and other magical disciplines, and Sherlock found most of it meaningless. Apart from the last claim, which might have some application someday, the rest was irrelevant to him. Divination itself was an elective that didn't even start until third year, and Sherlock trusted his own powers of deduction far more than any vague tea leaf reading. He had therefore decided to skim through this subject at exam time and get by. During class, he often tuned out completely. Near the end of the lesson, he leaned toward Harry and whispered a few words. Harry's eyes narrowed. A quick flash of excitement lit them. Everyone was whispering around them, so no one noticed. They left the astronomy tower with the others and trickled back toward the castle. Around 11, after finishing his preparations, Sherlock went down to the entrance hall and found Harry, Hermione, Ron, Neville, Dean, and Seamus lined up like sentries. Sherlock glanced at them and could tell what had happened without being told. Harry gave him a helpless look. Hermione stepped forward, worry written all over her face. "Sherlock will escort you," she said. "No need," Sherlock replied. "I can go alone." "Absolutely not." "Filch is a nasty piece of work," Seamus declared, his account growing more colorful by the second. "When students get detention, he wanted to hang them from the rafters and whip there." "Oh, Seamus," Hermione cut in, "Filch is horrible, but this is serious." "While Filch is certainly annoying," Ron added with a grin, "if he really tried that on Sherlock, Filch's backside would be the part that needed watching." Hermione scowled. "Ronald, you don't know what's in the Forbidden Forest." Hermione snapped. Harry suddenly clutched his stomach and bolted from the group. "I don't feel well," he muttered. They all looked after him. "Maybe he's come down with something?" Dean suggested. "Probably. Too cold tonight," said one of them. Only Hermione frowned more deeply. Something didn't sit right with her. Harry, however, was neither ill nor in retreat. He ducked into a side corridor, slipped on his invisibility cloak, and moved again. Training with Sherlock had sharpened his recon skills. With the cloak, he could get close without being seen. He closed in on where Sherlock had gone and discovered something unexpected. Sherlock and Filch stood alone, talking. Filch looked tense. Sherlock held Madame Norris in his hand. Harry froze. Madame Norris, Filch's beloved cat, the sleek, judgmental creature everyone at Hogwarts secretly wanted to kick, was being held by Sherlock. Worse, Sherlock seemed to be admonishing Filch, and Filch was listening as if the lecture made sense. The sight was dizzying. A few moments earlier, Filch had been leading Sherlock through the dark grounds with Madame Norris trailing. Sherlock had suddenly stopped, pointed at the cat, and said, "Mr. Filch, do you mistreat your cat?" Filch bristled. "What did you say?" "How dare you?" he snapped. Everyone knew Filch doted on Madame Norris. The idea that he would hurt her was absurd. Yet Filch could not use magic. His indignation was only feathers and bluster. Sherlock, unruffled, met his glare. "You don't actually believe Madame Norris's condition is unrelated to you, do you?" The moon slipped behind a cloud. Filch faltered, voice shaking. I didn't mistreat her. She's a picky eater. She eats very little. It's a stomach problem." Sherlock's tone was steady and precise. Cats can bloat for several reasons: eating too fast, food intolerance, spoiled food, environmental change, stress. If she's been bloated for a while, She can vomit, lose weight, and even develop an intestinal obstruction from lack of appetite. "Stop talking," Filch snapped, then looked wildly at Sherlock. "Well, what am I supposed to do?" Sherlock reached into his pocket and, to Filch's astonishment, lifted Madame Norris up by the scruff. "You don't want the poor thing's skin and bone from bloating, do you?" he said, stroking her. He had noticed, months ago, that the cat seemed thin with dull gray fur, but he had not had time to investigate properly until now. Under Sherlock's finger, Madame Norris, usually wary and aloof, began to soften. Sherlock produced a small green sprig from his pocket and offered it to her. She sniffed, hesitated, then, tempted by the smell, bit into it and chewed with sudden enthusiasm. Filch gaped. "What did you feed her?" "Catnip." "Catnip," Filch echoed, intrigued. "A perennial of the genus Nepeta in the mint family," Sherlock said without looking up. "Muggles call it catnip." At once Filch brightened. "Catnip? Can it cure Madame Norris?" Sherlock's face didn't change. "Catnip won't directly cure bloat," he said. Filch's hope dimmed until Sherlock added, "but it can help indirectly. Catnip stimulates pleasant behavioral responses in cats, relaxing them, hence the common name. It can make them roll, jump, chase imaginary things. That activity gets them moving, which can promote gastrointestinal motility. For acute bloat, though, you'll need additional measures." Filch grew noticeably nervous again. "What measures?" he asked. Sherlock, still holding the cat, met Filch's anxious eyes with a look of cool competence. "First, get her to a vet for a proper examination. If she's seriously bloated, she may need treatment. In the meantime, small, frequent meals of easily digestible food, a warm compress to the abdomen if she'll tolerate it, and gentle encouragement to move, short supervised walks, play with toys, can all help. And no more mystery food. Check everything she eats." Filch's shoulders sagged with relief and terror in equal measure. "You mean it could be serious?" "It could," Sherlock said. "And if you insist on leaving her outside or feeding her whatever scraps you like, it may get worse." Filch stared at him, then at the cat, then at the floor. He had come out to catch a rule breaker and found himself being instructed by the rule breaker instead. It unsettled him almost as much as Sherlock's certainty calmed him. Harry watched, invisible, as the exchange continued, Sherlock's voice precise and clinical, Filch's unsure and grateful by turns, Madame Norris licking at the green twig and blinking far less judgmentally than she usually did. The night air smelled of cold and mint. 86. Put him out of his pain. Adjust diet, encourage exercise, and medicate. When Filch asked Sherlock how to explain Madame Norris's condition, Sherlock did not mince words. Temporarily reduce her food intake. Give her small, frequent meals to ease the burden on her stomach. Use easily digestible foods. Canned cat food with high water content is best. You can also try probiotics and anti-flatulence remedies like simethicone. Filch stared at him like he'd been handed a spell in a language he didn't know. Canned cat food, probiotics, simethicone. Even the most complicated charms he'd ever seen hadn't felt as baffling. Yet when he glanced at Madame Norris, listless a moment before and now nuzzling Sherlock contentedly in his arms, Filch swallowed his confusion and listened like a dutiful pupil. Sherlock walked on, cradling the cat. Filch followed. One spoke, one listened, and they kept on until they reached the fringe of the forbidden forest. Only then did Filch realize he had been following. Why was Sherlock the one taking the lead? Before he could voice the question, Hagrid's voice came from nearby. "Is that you, Filch? Hurry up, I'm about to head in. Here you go." Sherlock handed Madame Norris to Filch as if it were the most natural thing. Filch felt the cat's claws sink in, and when Madame Norris, who normally clung only to him, tightened herself against Sherlock instead, his face darkened. He felt as if he'd been robbed. The question about why he'd been following was pushed down again. Practicality won out. "Do as I said," Sherlock added calmly. "I'll have my family send some suitable cat food and the anti-flatulence medicine." Filch wanted to refuse, but Madame Norris looked up at him with bright, hopeful eyes. He relented. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes." It took more resolve than he would admit to say it. Hagrid came up at that moment and watched the exchange, surprised. Filch lectured people like Sherlock, didn't he? Yet here they were getting on as if they'd always been friends. Hagrid had to laugh. Maybe Holmes really was capable if he could win over that cantankerous caretaker. The more capable Sherlock was, the better for investigating the Forbidden Forest. Filch, from here on, I'm in charge. All right. Filch glanced at Sherlock, gave a stiff nod, and turned away, still looking put out. After Filch's retreating back disappeared among the trees, Hagrid scratched his head and asked, half amused, half curious, Holmes, how'd you do that? Why's that old coot being so nice to you? Did you tell him you were detaining on purpose? No. I gave him some catnip, Hagrid grinned at once. Ah, that'd do it. Filch, annoying as he is, loves that cat like nothing else. They walked on toward the forest's edge. A cold wind blew, and even Hagrid hunched his broad shoulders. Sherlock felt nothing. He'd already cast a warming charm on himself. Hagrid held up his lamp and pointed to a silvery glow along a winding path disappearing into the trees. Look, that silvery white light, that's unicorn blood. Sherlock peered into the dark and saw the reflection Hagrid meant. It was a reminder that the usual Muggle rules for moving by sight didn't always apply here. Reflective patches could mean something entirely different in the magical world. Hagrid's voice turned heavy. A unicorn in the forest's been badly wounded by something. Last week I found one dead. Forest creatures don't normally harm unicorns. Some kind of poacher must have snuck in. Even if we can't figure why, we should find that unicorn and put it out of its misery. Hagrid sounded stricken. All the creatures of the forest were his friends, and a unicorn, sacred, noble, being hurt or killed was awful. He'd been poking around for 2 weeks with no luck. When he told Dumbledore about the dragon egg, he'd remembered Sherlock and suggested he come help. Dumbledore agreed, and the three of them were set to search. Sherlock listened quietly as Hagrid described unicorns in the forest, then asked a few precise questions. When Hagrid stopped, Sherlock shook his head. With respect, Hagrid, your idea is wrong. Huh, Hagrid blinked. What do you mean, wrong? If this was done by a poacher, then putting the unicorn out of its misery is no longer the main issue, Sherlock said. We should be putting him out of his misery instead. Hagrid stared. In the moonlight, he could see Sherlock was serious, not joking. Regret flickered across Hagrid's face. Perhaps asking Sherlock to help had been bold. He admired Sherlock's talent, but some dangers weren't for an 11-year-old to face alone. Listen, Holmes, Hagrid said earnestly. I admit you're clever. You see things most don't. Maybe you even saw Dumbledore through. But if there's a poacher sneaking into the forest who's hurting unicorns, that's serious. That's not something a first year should be dealing with. He paused, then added, The forest's full of danger, especially at night. But you'll be with me and Fang. No creature will harm you if I'm there. Oh, Sherlock's single reply was quiet. What's "oh" supposed to mean? Hagrid demanded. It means I understand. I was merely suggesting an approach. Hagrid nodded slowly. All right, good to know. Harry, crouched nearby beneath his invisibility cloak, nearly laughed out loud. Earlier in astronomy class, Sherlock had told him the story about his detention and had slipped the cloak onto Harry so he could come along, effectively a test of some of Sherlock's training. Harry, always ready for an adventure, had been thrilled. He hadn't expected so much entertainment before the official training even began. Filch confounded, Hagrid baffled, and then charmed. It was better than sneaking around Hogwarts at night. They went deeper into the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid watched Sherlock curiously. Though Sherlock was a Gryffindor, he was still only 11. Yet there was no sign of fear, only excitement in his eyes. If the Muggle world had an area like this, Sherlock would have explored every inch within a month. He had been remarkable at holding himself back for 5 months after arriving at Hogwarts. Hagrid continued chatting, and Sherlock listened, occasionally gesturing for Harry not to fall behind. Then, as if curious about everything, Sherlock asked, By the way, Hagrid, the Christmas present you gave us, that flute, it must be made of something special, right? Unicorn horn? Horned beast horn? Murtlap tentacle? Ha! I didn't expect you to know that much. Hagrid's voice changed, warmed by amusement. But you're wrong, Sherlock. It ain't the horn of any magical beast. Isn't it? Sherlock sounded surprised. It looked so hard I thought it might be a tentacle. That's what Muggles reckon, Hagrid laughed. I made it from the shell of a chisperful. Know what a chisperful is? A huge snail. We use their mucus for flobberworm mucus, and their shells are hard and change color every hour. Thought it'd make a right grand flute. It's very good, Sherlock said. Then, turning the conversation back, he asked, Hagrid, you've been at Hogwarts a long time. You must know the creatures of the Forbidden Forest well. That was all the encouragement Hagrid needed. He brightened and launched into a steady stream of information about the forest's inhabitants, delighted to share what he knew. Hagrid led Sherlock deeper and deeper into the Forbidden Forest. He had Fang looped on a lead in one huge hand, scanned the trees with the other, and talked as he walked. Don't let the mystery of the forest fool you, he said. There are more magical creatures in here than you could count, but I'm mates with most of them. Take Aragog. He's massive, and his bite'll make you numb for half a day, but he's a deer I brought home when I was at school. If it weren't for the timing tonight, I'd have taken you to meet him. The unicorns, sacred, white as snow, their horns like silver. They'll graze by the springs, gentle as anything. Then there's the centaurs, very clever, know more about the stars and maps than we do, though a touch unpredictable. If they understand your intent, they're fine. Further in, you'll find horned serpents, thestrals, neasels, bowtruckles, puffskeins, and werewolves. They're not common, but at times like a full moon, you've got to watch. The forest is far more dangerous than you think. Stick close to me. He never finished. Hagrid hauled Sherlock behind a great oak with a hissed oath, knocked an arrow, and loaded it into his crossbow, aiming down the path they had been walking. Something's coming, he hissed. Sherlock had noticed it a heartbeat earlier. He'd heard the faint scrape of fabric against leaf and loam, like a cloak being dragged, and it had been swallowed by Hagrid's voice when Hagrid lowered it. But Hagrid's reaction was not slow. He was tense, suddenly all concentration. Who's there? Show yourself, he thundered. Come out quickly, I've got a weapon, he added, so loud the words echoed among the trunks. Fang began to pace and growl at their feet, then bared his teeth toward the sound. A shape slid out of the gloom, not a witch or wizard, but a creature half man, half horse. The upper body was human, with a mane of red hair and a beard. From the waist down, it was a glossy reddish-brown horse, a long tail flicking behind it. Sherlock knew the sight instantly, a centaur. Hagrid relaxed at once. Oh, it's you, Ronan, he said, relief like a fog lifting. How are ye? Ronan's voice was deep and somber. Not well, Hagrid. You were going to shoot me? The centaur said, wounded. Now, don't be like that, Hagrid protested, stumbling forward and taking Ronan's forearm in a human handshake, as if that could smooth everything. He patted his quiver. You see, there's a nasty about the forest, he introduced Sherlock, and after a brief nod, Ronan only said, Mars is very bright tonight. Hagrid squinted up at the sky and echoed, Aye, it is bright. Ronan, there's a unicorn injured in the forest. Have you seen anything? Ronan continued to watch the sky without blinking. After a long, slow sigh, he murmured, It is always the innocent who suffer first. It has been so for hundreds of years. Hagrid tried again. Have you noticed anything odd around here? Any strange movement? Mars is very bright tonight, Ronan repeated. Hagrid went red. He hadn't expected to be lectured by someone watching the stars. Before he could answer, there was a rustle behind Ronan, and a second centaur stepped forward, black hair, a wilder beard. Hagrid's face, already tense, brightened. Bane. Good evening, Hagrid, Bane rumbled, joining Ronan and looking upward. Haven't you seen anything? Hagrid demanded. A unicorn's been hurt. Mars is very bright tonight, Bane said. Hagrid's jaw dropped. We heard that already. Ronan and Bane continued to stare at the heavens. Then together, in the same slow, detached cadence, both spoke again. Mars is very bright tonight. Hagrid threw his hands up. Right then. Well, good night, boys. He shoved his crossbow in his shoulder and turned back to Sherlock. Can't get a straight answer out of 'em. Centaurs, always looking at the stars, never speak plain. Sherlock had already noted it. They don't answer the way we expect, he said. Hagrid beamed at the praise as if it were sunshine. They followed the trail a while longer until they came to a fork. The ground was dusted with silver, unicorn blood still shining. Sherlock crouched and ran a finger along the glinting drops. It's fresh, he said. Wherever it went, it left only moments ago. If we're quick enough, we might still be able to save it. Hagrid peered down both paths, torn. Which way did it go, Sherlock? Sherlock shook his head. I can't tell. My suggestion is we split up. That's not possible, Hagrid blurted. The forest was too dangerous to leave anyone alone. Sherlock had anticipated the reply. I'll take precautions. If anything happens, I'll cast a flare." He waved his wand, and a purple spark bloomed at the tip, bright and hot, and exactly like the spell Dumbledore had used the night of the troll, the same one that had warned in the Quidditch stands. Hagrid's face crumpled with worry. He loved every creature in the forest, and the thought of a sacred unicorn being hurt made him near frantic. Sherlock pushed the point. "You wouldn't want another unicorn to die because help arrived too late, would you?" Hagrid stared at him, guilt and resolve battling. "All right, I'll trust you." He stopped and scowled. "But I'm sending Fang with you." "That's fair," Sherlock said quickly. "He'll warn you if there's danger, and he's cowardly, but he's alert." He took the big boarhound's lead. Hagrid, still restless, hurried back the other way. "No matter what happens, signal right away." Hagrid hesitated only a moment. "He's a coward, but he'll warn ye. Go on now, and be careful." Once Hagrid had gone, a small voice came from the shadowed edge of the trail. "Sherlock, what do we do now?" "Put on the invisibility cloak and keep up," Sherlock said without turning. Fang stiffened. The dog could smell whoever was nearby and became uneasy at the presence of an unseen person. Sherlock stroked the hound's head and told him the transparent person was not an enemy. Fang settled, but kept glancing where the sound had come from. Under the cloak, Harry flinched at the touch and whispered, "Right, okay." He slipped the cloak over his head and fell into step behind Sherlock. They threaded through the trees for half an hour, the light narrowing to slashes as the canopy thickened. At last, Sherlock stopped, crouched, and listened. He smiled faintly. "Looks like we're in luck," he said. Harry, still beneath the cloak, peered forward. "What is it?" "The truth has surfaced," Sherlock replied. Chapter 89, The Crawler. "Look closely. These silvery white stains are irregular, almost oval, here, and here." Sherlock crouched, indicating each mark to Harry. "They're drag marks and splash marks." "That means the unicorn struggled on this side, accelerating, running, jumping," Harry said. "Exactly. They were left when it fled, startled or provoked." Sherlock's gray eyes glittered. "Hagrid didn't tell us much, but the unicorn has given us our clues." "I think we'll meet him soon," he added. Harry's stomach tightened. "If we really meet him—" "First thing," Sherlock said without hesitation, "you use your wand to make a firework signal, then act decisively." "Understood." Harry squared his shoulders. This was why Sherlock had brought him into the Forbidden Forest, to confront whatever had been doing this. As the two of them and Fang went deeper, the trees grew thicker until even the narrow path was choked with roots and bracken. The silvery stains on the ground grew more frequent. Sherlock found a root almost entirely coated in the pallid, shimmering fluid and crouched to examine it. Fang grew uneasy, worrying at Sherlock's robe as if trying to pull him back. "Shh," Sherlock soothed. He would not retreat. "Harry, keep yourself concealed." They stepped over the stained root, and a few paces later came to a clearing. The path of silver crossed an old oak, and in the middle of the clearing, something pale gleamed on the leaf litter. It was the unicorn Hagrid had been searching for, and it was in terrible condition. It lay with legs unnaturally splayed, its white mane fanned across the dark leaves. Its eyes were clouded, but there was still a faint pleading in them. The animal was alive, but barely. Sherlock signaled Harry and Fang to stay hidden and watched. The undergrowth at the edge of the clearing trembled. A hooded figure slid out and began to crawl toward the unicorn. The movement was too animal to be human. It oozed something wrong and sinister. Harry and Fang froze. Sherlock did not. He slowly raised his wand. The figure reached the wounded unicorn and bowed over it. To their horror, it lowered its head and began to drink from the wound. The unicorn gave a tragic, desperate neigh. Though its legs were broken, it still thrashed weakly, and a burst of brilliant white light shot from its horn as if to repel death. The light was useless against what was happening. Sherlock no longer hesitated. He fired the spell he'd been ready with. Petrificus totalis. The creature, human in shape but unnatural in behavior, did not expect an ambush. It was hit by Sherlock's bodybind curse and collapsed backward into the bushes. Harry's eyes blurred as a sudden, searing pain jagged through his forehead. His scar had flared like a brand. This time the pain was deeper than any he had felt before. He stumbled to his knees. For a moment the world swam. Sherlock glanced at him and then raised his wand again, firing at the still lying figure. Confringo. A blast of fire burst toward the hooded wizard. It should have been devastating, but a thin, crackling barrier snapped into existence and deflected the explosion. A cold snort answered it. "You ruined my plan. Die!" the voice hissed. The figure flicked his wrist and sent out a black, tearing wave. Sherlock had expected a counterattack. He had already moved to the side. "Impedimenta," he chanted, hurling an obstruction charm that slowed the wraith-like assault. Watching the way the man drank the unicorn's blood and the heavy, ragged breathing that followed, Sherlock understood what they were up against. Hagrid's words fell into place. This creature needed the unicorn's blood to sustain some starvation of magic or life. It could not afford delay. Even if Dumbledore or Hagrid arrived, the wizard intended to drink his fill first. They had to act now. After raising a quick barrier charm, Sherlock closed the distance. He was a wizard, yes, but he was also built for close work. The dark-robed man turned, managed a shield charm, and prepared another magical riposte. Sherlock reached him before the second wave could form and drove a long sword through the gap. The blade flashed in the dim. For an instant it caught on the soft ribs beneath the cloak. Blood welled. The man hissed. The shield the man had conjured twisted spells and solid alike, and Sherlock's thrust only grazed, not pierced. Still, it hurt him enough to stagger him. Harry, gritting his teeth despite the pain in his head, managed to raise his wand and fire the agreed signal into the sky, 3 brilliant bursts as planned. The hooded man snarled, furious. If Dumbledore saw the signal and came, escape would be impossible in his weakened state. He intended to get away. Sherlock pulled his sword free, preparing to strike again. The man's face, when he saw an 11-year-old advancing on him, twisted into stunned fury. "Outrageous," he spat, and flung another impedimenta at Sherlock. The jinx slowed Sherlock's second thrust and gave the wizard the gap he needed. He backed away with the speed of someone fleeing a trap. Sherlock did not lower his guard. He put his wand away and drew a round shield he'd prepared earlier. The man, desperate, cast a final hateful curse. Crucio! Sherlock did not try to meet that agony head-on. He hurled the shield like a discus and rolled aside. The unforgivable hit the thrown shield squarely. The collision sent a shock through the ground, upturning leaves and soil in a small, violent wave. The shield absorbed the worst of it. When the dust settled, the wizard was gone. Harry ran to Sherlock and helped him to his feet. "Sherlock, I'm sorry. My scar," he panted. It burned like never before. Sherlock let Harry steady him, then patted the boy's shoulder. "My dear Harry, the pain prevented you from concentrating. It's not your fault." "How did you know?" Harry began, then remembered Sherlock's uncanny observations and stopped. He was still irritated with himself. "I couldn't help you properly. We came together, but in the end I had to rely on you." "If you hadn't signaled successfully, he wouldn't have left as quickly," Sherlock said, nodding toward the ground. He indicated something beside them. "Harry, pick that up, will you?" Harry bent and scooped up the shield. He blinked in confusion. It wasn't a shield at all. What he held was a compressed mass of hard, flaky rock cakes with a strip bolted to one side like a handle. Sherlock had pressed and bound Hagrid's stone-baked rock cakes into a makeshift shield. "You actually used it as armor?" Harry said, incredulous. Sherlock smiled faintly. "If you don't treat them as food but as tools, armor, weapons, they become very practical." Harry could only gape. Speechless admiration replaced his earlier self-reproach. Chapter 89. Suddenly a madman sharpens his knife at night. A massive creature is approaching fast. If I'm not mistaken, it should be Hagrid. Sherlock sheathed his longsword and folded away his makeshift shield, then turned to Harry. "My dear Harry, if you can, please remain invisible." Harry nodded. For many reasons, he didn't want Hagrid to know he had been in the Forbidden Forest tonight. Sherlock, good heavens, what happened here?" When Hagrid reached the clearing and saw the scene and the dying unicorn, he was almost speechless, only managing to stroke his beard again and again. "Oh, blimey. Wait, first, see if it can be saved." Sherlock pointed at the unicorn. Its legs were broken. "By Merlin, who could do this? Wait." He bent closer and noticed the telltale puncture marks and the wetness at the wound. "Someone's been drinking its blood." Hagrid's eyes went wide as brass bells. "Harry, no, listen, you know what that means, right? Unicorn blood can keep someone alive, yes, but only if the unicorn gives it willingly. If a person forces the blood onto their lips to save themselves, the moment that blood touches their mouth, they don't truly live again. They live half a life, a cursed life. Sherlock spoke slowly, stating the fact but also explaining to Harry, who stood beside him under his invisibility cloak. Harry finally understood. The man he'd just faced was none other than the murderer of his parents, the Dark Lord who had made the wizarding world tremble, Lord Voldemort. And yet, he hadn't seemed very powerful. Sherlock knew what it meant. Hagrid did not, and Sherlock had not expected him to. For the moment, his primary task was to tend to the injured unicorn. Fortunately, though grievously wounded, it could still be saved. Sherlock had acted in time. The immediate investigation into the unicorn attack in the Forbidden Forest was over. Hagrid thought Sherlock had been lucky to figure it out the first night. Sherlock knew the attacker had been desperate and rushed. Next, they needed to tell Dumbledore and let him handle it. After tonight, the perpetrator would not return to the forest. On the way back, Hagrid found Fang, who had run off, and a centaur. This one was neither Ronan nor Bane. He looked younger and handsome. Platinum hair, a silver-maned horse body, and pale blue eyes, like some fairy tale prince. "Firenze, it's good to see you." The centaur, Firenze, greeted Hagrid, then glanced at the unicorn. "Hagrid, what's that? A unicorn, are you all right?" Seeing Hagrid carrying a unicorn with broken legs, Firenze panicked. "It was that fellow lurking in the forest, wasn't it?" "Calm down, Firenze," Hagrid crooned as he patted the beast. Luckily, Sherlock arrived in time. It didn't die, and the poacher was driven off. Thank heavens. Relieved, Firenze turned to Sherlock. "Thank you for saving the poor thing." He was far more cordial than Ronan and Bane had been earlier. "You are Sherlock Holmes? I've heard your name. You are remarkable for one so young." Hagrid patted Sherlock on the shoulder and beamed. "Ha! I didn't expect you to be so well known among the centaurs. I thought only Harry could boast that." More hoofbeats sounded from the far side of the clearing, Ronan and Bane, whom they'd seen before. Both arrived out of breath, flanks heaving, dripping with sweat as if they'd been running hard. "Firenze," Bane called. "Bane, I am not deaf. You needn't shout," Firenze snapped. "What have you told him?" Bane bristled. "Remember, Firenze, we swore never to go against the will of the heavens. Did you not see the omens the planets showed us?" Ronan pawed at the ground awkwardly and tried to explain in a sorrowful tone. "I think Firenze believed he acted from good intentions." "Good intentions," Bane exploded. "What have good intentions to do with it? Centaurs care for the prophecies of the stars. We will not run about like donkeys, following lost humans in our forest." Hagrid's face flared. Before he could answer, Firenze reared up on his hind legs, a gesture centaurs only make when they are extremely angry. "Did you not see that unicorn?" He roared at Bane. "Do you not understand why it was killed? Did the planets not reveal the truth to you? I will not stand by while that creature lurks in our forest, Bane. If need be, I will stand with the humans." Then he lowered himself and motioned to Sherlock and Hagrid to follow. Neither of them objected. They both preferred a straightforward ally to riddle spitters. Once they had left Bane and Ronan behind, Firenze stopped and turned back to Sherlock. "Holmes, do you know why Bane was so angry just now?" Hagrid chuckled. "Firenze, you never speak plainly. Sherlock, you couldn't possibly guess, could you?" "I can probably deduce some things," Sherlock replied. Firenze's eyes brightened. "Tell me." "It's simple. He didn't want you to tell the others what the stars showed you." Firenze's blue eyes lit. "Indeed. Then do you know what the stars showed?" Sherlock sighed. "It is obvious. The one who harmed the unicorn is Lord Voldemort." At that name, Hagrid gasped. Harry, invisible, pulled his cloak tighter. It felt as if the air had chilled. "Impossible. Absolutely impossible." Hagrid shook his massive head fiercely. "With Dumbledore at Hogwarts, you-know-who can't get in." Firenze's reaction was calmer. He regarded Sherlock with approval. "Holmes, you are exactly as I'd heard. You should study divination." "Divination?" Sherlock shook his head. "I reached that conclusion by deduction, by reasoning. It had nothing to do with fortune-telling. The stars told me the prophecy, and you tell me you used science." Firenze's expression went a little strange. In a world of magic, talk of science always sounded odd. "But how did you deduce it?" Harry, cloaked and unseen, smiled slightly. He knew his friend was about to explain. Sherlock continued, plain and precise. Unicorn blood, taken by force, curses a person with a half-life. For an ordinary person, living half a life in a cursed state is worse than dying, unless the intent is only to prolong life briefly, to give the cursed person time to obtain something that can fully restore their vitality and magic. Coincidentally, the Philosopher's Stone, which can produce the elixir of life, is here at the school. For you-know-who has lain dormant for years and seeks to rise again, I do not think he would pass up such an opportunity. Firenze was stunned. Sherlock, you already thought of this. Hagrid, belatedly connecting the dots, blurted, So that's what you were thinking? Harry almost tripped in relief. His giant friend was a little slow on the uptake. But even after grasping Sherlock's reasoning, Hagrid mumbled, Still, Sherlock, I don't believe it. As long as Dumbledore's at the school, you-know-who won't succeed. His faith in Dumbledore was near worshipful. Sherlock did not argue. Firenze, however, was quieter. This is not only deduction, it is what the stars have shown me. Hagrid, we centaurs are seldom wrong. Hogwash, you are wrong this time, Firenze, and you too, Sherlock. Seeing Hagrid go on the offensive, Firenze said no more. He knew it was pointless to argue with him now. Soon the small group, one centaur, one unicorn, and one dog, reached the edge of the forbidden forest. Let's part here, Firenze said. I wish you luck. The stars have been misread before. Even centaurs make mistakes. I hope this is one of those times. Sherlock added one last thing for the centaur who had been kind rather than cryptic. There's a line that might suit your divination better. Firenze tilted his head. What is it? Suddenly a madman sharpens his blade at night, the Emperor's star sways, and Mars rises high. He waved to Firenze and walked toward the castle with Hagrid. Firenze repeated the phrase softly, tasting it. His eyes flashed, a startling sapphire. Indeed, that fits far better than Mars is bright tonight. 90. You go and kill Voldemort and his servants. Firenze, like the other centaurs, held destiny in deep reverence. Unlike most of his herd, however, he did not share their visceral aversion to wizards and was not stingy with help when humans were in danger. That made him an oddity among centaurs. Ronan and Bane's behavior tonight made that obvious. Astrologers know Mars is always tied to war, conflict, and violence. When Ronan kept telling Sherlock and Hagrid that Mars was bright, he was warning that the magical world faced trouble. After a decade of peace, war might be returning. Dark forces were stirring, likely to bring conflict and disaster. All of this traced back to Voldemort's resurrection and his hunger for the Philosopher's Stone. Centaurs, unable to speak plainly, repeated their omen over and over. But Sherlock's line, a madman grinds his blade at night, the Emperor's star wavers, and Mars looms high, had an imagery the simple Mars is bright tonight could not match. Both meant the same thing, but the poetry elevated the warning. Firenze resolved then and there that when he returned to the herd, he would use Sherlock's phrasing instead of the old refrain. It suited the centaur's manner, profound and mysterious. He did not expect that Sherlock's casual turn of phrase would improve his standing among the herd. While that change chewed on Firenze's mind, Sherlock was explaining the origin of the lines to a curious Hagrid and to Harry, who was still under his invisibility cloak. This Christmas, a classmate gave me a strange book, Sherlock said, full of odd things, mysterious Eastern characters and stories. In it were these 2 lines of poetry, with simple notes. They come from an ancient Chinese general. That country has 5,000 years of studying human nature. No one understands it better. Hagrid listened, half comprehending, and burst out. Why'd you tell him that? Just hoping our centaur friend who helped us will have an easier time when he goes home, Sherlock replied. Right, Hagrid. Please tend the unicorn quickly. Our headmaster will be going to bed. Hagrid hurried back to the unicorn's side, and Sherlock and he went straight to Dumbledore's office. Dumbledore looked rather put out when they arrived. Can't you show an old man some consideration? What's so important it can't wait until morning? He was in a star-patterned nightgown and clearly had sleep on his mind. You know me, sir, Hagrid began awkwardly. Dumbledore smiled, indulgent. My dear Rubus, of course I know you. There's news from the Forbidden Forest? Hagrid nodded heavily. Yes, we saved the unicorn, but the poacher got away and Sherlock faced him. Sherlock said he was. Hagrid's lips trembled, and he could not say the name. Dumbledore was not surprised. He turned to Sherlock and said quietly, It was Lord Voldemort. Hagrid visibly shuddered and drew a sharp breath. The air beside him seemed to ripple. Light flashed on Dumbledore's spectacles, and he looked back at Hagrid with a gentleness that might have been pity. "Hagrid, would you step out for a moment?" Hagrid blinked, dejected, and left the office. "I thought you'd try to persuade me to let Hagrid stay," Dumbledore said, turning back to Sherlock with a faint smile. "No need," Sherlock replied. "This isn't something he should know. He's taken Veritaserum by nature," Dumbledore said, amused. Dumbledore paused, then added, "But I think your other friend can reveal himself now, can't he?" Harry, under the cloak, stood still. He had spent enough time with Sherlock to distrust easy assumptions. Was Dumbledore trying to trick him? Sherlock said plainly, "Reveal yourself. You were spotted the moment you entered." Harry took his cloak off at once and looked awkwardly at Dumbledore. "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't think you'd notice." "How odd. More confidence for being invisible," Dumbledore observed, still smiling. Harry relaxed. Dumbledore was not angry. "How did you know I was noticed?" Harry asked. "A keen observer, if they watch carefully and systematically, can infer a person's thoughts from their fleeting expressions, a muscle twitch, the motion of an eye," Sherlock explained. "When Hagrid and I first came in, your gaze, apart from focusing on us, lingered for 3 seconds on the spot beside me, exactly where you were. And when Hagrid mentioned Voldemort, your gaze shifted back to that spot. 2 confirmations suffice." Dumbledore considered this, then waved his wand, conjuring 2 tumblers of lemonade and setting them before Sherlock and Harry. "Have a drink." Sherlock didn't touch his. Harry said thank you and drank his straight off. He had not physically fought tonight, but running in and out of the forest had sapped him. He needed to rehydrate. Then he regretted it. It was overwhelmingly sweet. Dumbledore had drowned the lemon in sugar. Harry suspected Sherlock's refusal was deliberate and admired him for it. Dumbledore, apparently unconcerned by their expressions, asked calmly, "So it wasn't a single person who did the fighting tonight, but 2, correct?" Harry, embarrassed, protested, "Sir, it was all thanks to Sherlock. I only set off some fireworks." "No, Harry. If you hadn't set off those sparks, Voldemort wouldn't have left so quickly," Dumbledore said. "But don't worry over the details," Dumbledore cut him off, pushing his spectacles up. "You did very well tonight, and I believe your friend thinks so too." "Well said," Sherlock added. "In fact, I made one oversight in tonight's operation," Sherlock said. "An oversight?" Dumbledore leaned forward. His curiosity for this remarkable student was always keen. Sherlock raised his wand and with a quick flick sent a small shower of purple sparks into the air. Dumbledore's face lit up. "A very good warning charm. I used that on Halloween once. I didn't expect you to have put it to practical use so soon." Dumbledore nodded approvingly, but Sherlock's remark had not been about the charm. "Harry fired red sparks when he encountered Voldemort," he said calmly. Dumbledore understood immediately. Harry's face went pale. I didn't think of that at all." "Rubus didn't think of it either, did he?" Dumbledore chuckled. "He'll soon forget, believe me." "But not everyone is Hagrid," Sherlock said solemnly. "Before the battle, I should have told Harry to use that." Dumbledore smiled indulgently. "You've both done very well. If it had been me as a student, I would not have been as capable as you two." "Yes, after all, you didn't have a powerful headmaster behind you supporting you to fight the Dark Lord," Sherlock replied, as cutting as ever. Dumbledore let the barbed remark drop. "In fact, Voldemort's hunger for unicorn blood is more than you can imagine. Your stopping him tonight was a great victory." Sherlock frowned. "Unicorn blood only prolongs life at a terrible price. The Philosopher's Stone is his real aim." "That's because you don't know all the effects of unicorn blood," Dumbledore said calmly. "It can create a temporary body, one twisted by dark magic." At that, the pieces clicked into place for Sherlock. If true, the encounter with Voldemort that night had been even more significant than they had thought. No wonder Quirrell, Lord Voldemort, hadn't drunk the blood after slaying the unicorn. What he needed was for the unicorn to watch its life ebb away, full of helplessness, so its last feelings would be concentrated resentment. Sherlock, well read in strange literatures, had seen similar methods in the works of certain ancient Eastern cults. Evils using a dying victim's hatred to refine cursed artifacts. Compared to those depictions, Voldemort might even be crude, but the principle was the same. Harry then told Dumbledore everything about the night. Sherlock added nothing. He had learned Harry had a talent for recounting and summarizing events clearly. Lord Voldemort is very weak now, Harry said. From his impatience and tonight's battle, his hold over Quirrell isn't as perfect as it seemed. Dumbledore thought for a moment and said gently, I hope you will be able to defeat him again. Me? Harry stared, incredulous, pointed at his own chest. Sir, I'm only a first year. I haven't even learned many offensive charms. You want me to take on Voldemort and Quirrell? If Sherlock had not been in his life, Harry might have accepted that as a noble, fated responsibility. Without Sherlock, he would have been driven by revenge and schoolboy bravado. But spending time with Sherlock had changed him. He no longer lost common sense to grand speeches. Dumbledore seemed surprised by Harry's bluntness. Harry was not supposed to be like this. But then Dumbledore's gaze shifted to Sherlock. Sherlock's face remained inscrutable. This is pure friendship. Seeing Sherlock's cold, unyielding expression, Dumbledore could only say, Sherlock, our agreement. Does it have to be this way? Sherlock interrupted. What did you say? Do you really have to make Harry face Lord Voldemort? Sherlock met Dumbledore without flinching and enunciated each word. Making a first-year face Lord Voldemort again and again, it's brilliantly stupid. Do you think Harry will thank you? Or are you hoping he'll thank you from his grave? Tonight's battle already proved he can't even stay calm when Voldemort appears. Dumbledore coughed. About that scar. Actually, I have an idea. Sherlock cut him off. Are you treating Harry as the chosen one, or as a sacrifice? Headmaster, you can't expect us first years to guard the Philosopher's Stone. If the magical world is really so powerless, maybe it's better to destroy the stone. His bluntness stunned Dumbledore and left Harry breathless. This was Dumbledore. Ordinarily gentle and approachable, the one teachers like McGonagall and Snape were more feared than he was. His many titles, the President of the International Confederation of Wizards, First Class Order of Merlin, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, and Headmaster of Hogwarts, were not empty honors. He was widely regarded as the greatest wizard of his age and, they said, the only man Voldemort feared. For a first year to speak to him like that was like pointing a finger and cursing. But when Harry realized Sherlock was speaking out for him, a warmth spread through him. Sherlock suddenly seemed immense. Dumbledore turned his gaze to Harry. Sherlock's eyes narrowed. Dumbledore's voice softened to almost a plea. Harry, trust me. I only need you to face him one more time, one last time. Dumbledore was clearly searching for a way forward. He had not expected Sherlock's influence on Harry to be so strong in less than a year. He had seen much in his life, but he found it hard to judge whether this was the right thing for Harry. Earlier, he'd used the Mirror of Erised to try to see their true natures. Harry's result had been within expectation, but Sherlock's had left Dumbledore uncertain. One thing was clear. Sherlock's friendship with Harry was clean and pure. That, at least, was something to trust. So now he met Harry with humility, appealing to his understanding for Harry himself and for the future of the magical world. Harry looked at Sherlock with difficulty. Sherlock. Sherlock pinched the bridge of his nose. Harry was a good kid, just a little slow to react. Since this was Harry's choice, Sherlock would not interfere. He still made one demand. Headmaster, whatever can be solved with brains has been. When force is needed, please don't let us down. Dumbledore's eyes lit. Of course, I promise you, whatever means Voldemort has used to control Quirrell, it won't harm you. Let's hope so, Sherlock answered, still tight-lipped but clearly giving ground. Harry and Dumbledore both let out silent breaths of relief and exchanged glances, each seeing the other's easing tension. So when do you plan to leave? Sherlock suddenly spoke again. What did you say? Dumbledore blinked and answered without thinking. Then he felt a pang of unease. He had underestimated how volatile this boy could be. He had dealt with Sherlock enough to know his brilliance and kindness, but also his merciless tongue when provoked. Sherlock was angry. As Dumbledore expected, Sherlock unleashed himself. Tell me, is your brain mostly sugar these days, or is this the start of senility? If Quirrell were still at school, how could he possibly reach the stone? Dumbledore had braced for some resistance, but Sherlock's attack was fiercer than he'd imagined. It seemed the indignity of forcing Harry to face Voldemort had struck a nerve. Dumbledore felt helpless and oddly happy all at once, happy that Harry had a friend who would think of him this way. "I'll make it look as if I've left the school," Dumbledore said. "He was stabbed by me. He should take time to recover. I'll have Watson and Hedwig inform you. What about Harry's scar? I have no solution yet, only a hypothesis that may be confirmed by what happens. I'll need a detailed layout of the stone's defenses. I'll send you a letter. I'll have Watson bring it." They negotiated like that, sorting out the crucial points for Harry's confrontation with Voldemort. Harry listened, bewildered. He began. Sherlock patted his shoulder. "Come on, Harry. There's nothing more for us here. But go with your little lions." Harry looked at Dumbledore, who smiled and nodded. "And Sherlock, are you really not going to join me for a glass of lemonade?" "Keep your syrup, Headmaster. And by the way, you should consider using your free dental checkup this year. Dr. Granger's clinic will be delighted to see you." Dumbledore said nothing. Under the invisibility cloak, Sherlock and Harry returned to the dormitory. Ron, Neville, and Dean were already asleep. The next morning, Sherlock took Harry out for his exercises. The events in the Forbidden Forest had shown Harry how much he needed to improve, and he trained harder than ever. After their run, they went back to the Great Hall. Seeing no one around, Harry finally asked a question he'd been holding in. "Sherlock, how can Hagrid's rock cakes block a charm?" Sherlock laughed. "I thought you'd ask sooner." Harry flushed. He had been curious but embarrassed. Sherlock smiled and explained, "Think about the nature of a charm. It's a way to harness magical energy to produce an effect beyond the mundane. Offensive charms often manifest with physical signs, sound, light, so they can be missed, dodged, or blocked. Even a powerful charm can be stopped by a hard object. It's like physical shields against mundane attacks. Magic has its defenses too. Now consider Hagrid. His half-giant nature gives him a degree of innate resistance to magic. People forget that this resistance can be transferred to the things he makes. So Hagrid's rock cakes, made with his particular care and imbued with a trace of that resistance, combined with their hard texture, could block a charm. It sounds accidental, but there's a clear logic to it. When I first faced an unforgivable curse, I wasn't certain either, which is why I threw a shield immediately. But it seems Hagrid's cakes really did inherit that quality. In the next encounter, the shield will be even more important. Now hand me that teacup. I've got to plan your training before your next meeting with him, and Dumbledore's moves once he leaves the school. Over the next 2 weeks, just as Sherlock had predicted, Professor Quirrell did not appear for Defense Against the Dark Arts. That reinforced the belief that the pale, crawling figure they'd seen was Quirrell. Whether Voldemort controlled Quirrell's body through dark magic or somehow attached himself to Quirrell remained unclear. The official explanation, Quirrell had taken sick leave, came from none other than Professor Snape. With Quirrell absent, Snape took over the class. His presence cost Gryffindor a lot of points. Besides Harry, who always seemed to incur deductions for inexplicable reasons, Neville's poor charms and Seamus's tendency to cause explosions made them frequent targets. Gryffindor's standing, already hurt when Sherlock publicly bested a classmate, dropped even further over the fortnight. Under Snape's strictness, they slipped to the bottom of the House Cup table. Slytherin pulled further ahead. The little lions complained bitterly. There was one exception. Sherlock seemed quite pleased with how things had turned out. "Because I stabbed him." Compared with Quirrell, who at least had a decent bedside manner, Snape, terrible attitude aside when he was substituting, actually taught useful things. It was hard to imagine that first-year students didn't get a practical lesson in Expelliarmus until the latter half of the term. The incantation was Expelliarmus, and as the name implied, it made an opponent's wand fly out of their hand. Most witches and wizards relied on a wand to guide and control magic accurately. A wand focused and amplified a caster's power. Wandless magic was far harder, much more unstable, and prone to accidents. So Expelliarmus naturally became the basic, practical, offensive charm. Its strength depended on the caster's ability. Sherlock and Harry both showed extraordinary talent in the class, especially Harry. This was the first time, apart from Quidditch, that he had displayed the qualities people associated with the savior of the magical world. Even Hermione, already acknowledged as an academic prodigy, couldn't match him. Snape's gaze settled on Harry's green eyes. After a moment, in his usual low voice, he said, "A textbook Expelliarmus, Mr. Potter." Harry, surprised and secretly proud at the rare praise, felt a rush of relief. He'd received a high mark on potions at Christmas, and Sherlock had told him about the professor's history with his mother Lily, but he hadn't dared relax. Sherlock had made it clear that Snape's protection of him was because he was Lily's son, nothing more. Sure enough, the praise turned on a dime. "However," Snape continued, "since your Expelliarmus is so exemplary, why won't you help your classmates? Finnegan was standing right next to you and managed to turn his Expelliarmus into an exploding charm. Am I to call him a genius or an idiot? Potter, because of your inaction, Gryffindor loses 5 points." This was the real Professor Snape. Harry stifled a long sigh of relief. Everyone else in Gryffindor was used to Snape finding reasons to dock points. If he didn't take points one day, that would be the odd occurrence. So even though Seamus had already been penalized once, and the blame was now illogically shifted onto Harry, the other Gryffindors weren't surprised. They silently mouthed what they all thought, "That's just him. Unbelievable, losing points twice for the same thing." After class, Seamus was the first to complain. "I wonder when Professor Quirrell will be back. Detective Holmes, can you deduce it?" Detective Holmes was the student's nickname for Sherlock. It had spread from other houses. Before Christmas, he'd helped Hannah Abbott with a tricky sorting hat problem, then taken several other requests and solved them all. With incidents on Halloween, help in flying class, and similar matters, the nickname stuck. Gryffindor, predictably, were the last to learn. Their house routine didn't often demand foresight, so they rarely sought Sherlock's aid. Hermione's nickname had been Gryffindor's Know-It-All, later becoming Miss Know-It-All, once her reputation left the house. "Probably after Easter," Sherlock said confidently. 2 weeks rest, maybe plus the break. Honestly, I'd prefer he didn't come back." "No way?" Seamus blinked. "You want that old bat to keep teaching us?" Old Bat was Snape's nickname among the Weasley brothers, coined because he prowled the corridors in his black robes and surfaced whenever points needed to be deducted. Once the name caught on, it spread even to Slytherin. Sherlock spoke seriously. "He's a good teacher. His instruction far surpasses Professor Quirrell's. To be fair, Quirrell doesn't even deserve comparison." Seamus looked uncomfortable. Neville and Dean glanced away, pretending to admire the scenery. Ron, prompted by Seamus's pleading look, cleared his throat to argue, but Hermione interrupted. "Sherlock's right," she said. "Professor Snape deducts points arbitrarily, but you learn real skills from him." She shot Ron a fierce glare. He fell silent. When you relied on someone, when your homework still depended on them, you couldn't always speak freely. No one else disagreed, and Hermione nodded in satisfaction before turning to Sherlock with a question that had been overlooked. "How do you know Professor Quirrell will be back soon?" "Because I stabbed him with a sword," Sherlock said flatly. 2 weeks rest, plus the Easter holiday. That's about right." They were stunned for a beat, then burst into laughter. Ron laughed the loudest, wiping tears from his eyes. "Mate, I didn't expect you'd go for that kind of dark humor. If that's true, then maybe I'll never find a girlfriend before I'm 20. Neville, Seamus, and Dean laughed along. Harry looked around and joined in, careful to match the others' amusement. The mood brightened, everyone except Hermione. She frowned. "That isn't funny," she said, clearly unconvinced. "When you tell the truth, sometimes no one believes you." Before Easter, Sherlock resumed his nighttime excursions around Hogwarts with Harry, an activity that appeared to have Dumbledore's tacit approval. With the second Quidditch match over, their morning training also went back to full intensity. Sherlock took Harry to the library on weekends as well. The original Sherlock-Hermione partnership became a Sherlock-Hermione-Harry trio. Ron found it puzzling. Hermione was pleased. The Savior, following the Lion King, was finally on the right path. Hermione and Ron didn't know the real reason Sherlock brought Harry to the library. Dumbledore had already sent detailed information about the Philosopher's Stone through Watson. Although the entrance guarding the stone was on the 4th-floor corridor, the main defenses lay underground. 7 rooms, each protected by different measures set by various professors. The arrangements were fluffy, the 3-headed dog Hagrid had bought, Devil's Snare, Professor Sprout's plant, flying keys enchanted by Professor Flitwick, a giant chessboard transfigured by Professor McGonagall, and, at the time it was set up, a troll placed by Quirrell. When the protections were being arranged, first years hadn't yet arrived, and Dumbledore didn't suspect Quirrell. He had believed Quirrell to be a talented Ravenclaw and had assigned him a role to diversify the defenses. Different professors setting different types of magical obstacles made the system richer and more flexible. After Quirrell's contribution came checkpoints set by Snape and Dumbledore himself. Snape's room, unsurprisingly, was about potions. Dumbledore had told Sherlock that Snape's obstacle would be the easiest for him. As for Dumbledore's own test, he hadn't revealed its contents in the letter Watson delivered, only promising he wouldn't disappoint Sherlock. Sherlock was non-committal. Knowing the questions in advance made the first few rooms an open-book exam, and in retrospect, he regretted asking. It had been boring. The most challenging obstacle, ironically, was Quirrell's troll. Sherlock had faced a mountain troll in the underground classroom and knew well that defeating one wasn't simple. In some survival manual, a fictional Bear Grylls had reportedly subdued a troll while starving, but Grylls' methods clearly weren't applicable to an ordinary student. Fortunately, Sherlock's objective was to get past the troll's room, not necessarily to fight it head-on, which left him more options. Meanwhile, Snape's 2-week substitution had indirectly offered Sherlock ideas. He needed to train Harry's direct combat ability properly, so the boy could actually do damage in the coming confrontation with Voldemort. When you concentrate on something, time passes quickly. The first Sunday after the spring equinox, full moon, brought Easter. Like Christmas and Halloween, Easter once had strong religious meaning, but over time it became a festival of celebration. Its symbols were Easter eggs and the Easter bunny, the lily, its emblematic flower. Among Hogwarts students, it was second only to Christmas in popularity because it meant another holiday. 93. Maybe. I came at the wrong time. Easter holidays at Hogwarts ran from late March to early April. Like Christmas, students could choose to go home or stay at school. Unlike the relaxed Christmas break, however, professors always loaded Easter with work. This year was no different. Even top students like Hermione ended up spending days in the library just to finish their assignments. The rest of the term time was taken up too. Quidditch teams used the holiday for intensive training ahead of the House Cup finals. Oliver Wood, Gryffindor captain, had already cornered Harry. "Potter, you're not going home for the holidays, are you?" Wood asked. "Aye." Harry began. "Good, I knew you wouldn't. The weather's supposed to be great. We'll be flying every day, perfect for training. You know, we've already won 2 matches, beat Ravenclaw in the final, and the cup's ours." Wood's eyes glittered with that wild intensity he always had. Even Seamus and Dean, who'd been planning to speak to Harry, kept their distance. "It's decided. 1 week of closed training, 1 week of intense drills. I'll let you know the schedule." Harry opened his mouth but said nothing. No sooner had Wood left than the Weasley twins swaggered over, arms over each other's shoulders. "Don't worry, Potter. It won't be as bad as he makes it sound," one said. "Oliver's in his 5th year. He's got a WLs to prepare for." "What exam?" Harry asked. Hermione, who had been nearby, answered before he could. "Ordinary wizarding levels, OWLs. 5th years sit them. The results determine which subjects you can take next year. The exams are managed by the Wizarding Examinations Authority." The twins exchanged an exaggerated look of awe. "As expected of Miss Granger, already knows the system in her first year," one said, and they clapped Harry on the shoulder. "Just relax this holiday, Potter. Oh, Lee Jordan says he's found a secret passage that leads out of the school. I bet it's the one behind the Gregory the Smarmy statue. We found that in our first week. See ya." After they staggered off, Hermione turned to Harry. "Are you going home this holiday?" Harry shook his head. His relationship with the Dursleys had improved a little, thanks to Sherlock, but he still didn't want to spend Easter at Privet Drive, and he certainly couldn't spend it at Sherlock's house either. "Professors gave us too much homework, and Woods already pressed me into holiday training." Hermione nodded. "Me too. Ron's staying as well. By the way, do you know where Sherlock is? He wasn't in the library today." Harry shook his head. Even though they shared a dormitory, Sherlock's whereabouts were often a mystery. If Harry had to pick one word to describe him, it would be elusive. Sometimes he wondered if Sherlock was secretly slipping out under his invisibility cloak. If Sherlock really had agreed to Mycroft's surveillance, as he had said, Harry doubted he'd ever have noticed. Sherlock rarely revealed himself unless he wanted to. Just then, Dean and Seamus returned and pulled Harry away for a game of wizard's chess. Hermione, however, followed the direction they'd indicated toward the Great Hall and didn't take long to find Sherlock. He wasn't alone. "Ravenclaw?" she murmured when she saw the two girls sitting with him. Hermione recognized Cho Chang immediately, the same girl who had sought Sherlock out before Christmas. Cho was one of the few Asian students at Hogwarts, a second-year Ravenclaw. The other girl was Penelope Clearwater, a fifth-year Ravenclaw prefect. Hermione hadn't expected to see Penelope with him. "Sorry," Hermione began, feeling a little rude for calling out like that, but she had already guessed the two were consulting Sherlock, as Hannah Abbott had before. "Perhaps I've come at a bad time." "No, you've come at exactly the right time," Sherlock said. "I suppose Dean told you I was here?" "Yes, and Seamus." Sherlock's voice was casual, but he gestured for Hermione to sit. Since Hermione already knew both Ravenclaw girls, introductions weren't necessary. Cho and Penelope exchanged a look, surprised to see Hermione, surprised that Sherlock had expected her. Cho took a breath and began. "I didn't want to bother Mr. Holmes again. It's a small matter, and I didn't want to trouble the house, but Penelope insisted." Cho's voice was careful. "I'm not good at telling stories, so I'll say everything plainly. It starts at Christmas. My father is often away on business. Even then, he couldn't come home for the holiday, but he still sent me a present, a 7-color eyeshadow set from an old magic items shop on Hangzhou's Old Street. It came in a sandalwood case carved with plum, orchid, bamboo, and chrysanthemum. My mother was thrilled. She said the shop was a century old, that the pigments were made from ancient minerals, and even the little porcelain wells had been refired as Longquan Celadon." Cho smiled at the memory. "I was stunned when I opened it. The case had 7 porcelain wells set in the sandalwood, colors from sapphire blue to peach blossom pink, like the 4 seasons of Jiangnan packed into a square. I kept it in my dressing box at school. My friends liked it too, and we'd planned to wear it when we went out this Easter." She paused. Sherlock and Hermione watched her. Whatever came next was the reason they'd come. "On the last potions class before Easter, my friends and I came back to the dorm as usual. The dressing box was where I'd left it, but the sandalwood case was gone. We searched the dorm, asked around, but no one had gone in. Maybe I put it somewhere and forgot. I told myself that. But it wasn't just a cosmetic box." Sherlock leaned forward, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He looked at Cho with the same impatient attention he gave every detail that might matter. "Most of what you just said was unnecessary, but continue," he said bluntly. Cho flushed. "I'm sorry, Holmes. I don't know what you find useful." "Was there anything special about the eyeshadow itself?" Sherlock interrupted. "It wasn't just the colors," Cho explained. "Each shade was unique and magical. The golden red gave a warm glow and made the eyes seem brighter in social situations. The deep blue felt like the night sky, mysterious and profound. The pink was like peach blossoms, gentle and sweet. They weren't ordinary pigments. They were infused with rare magical plants and mineral powders. Each color had a charm. The light blue could calm someone when they were anxious. The golden shade, that one had tiny sparkling flecks. In a crowd, it made the wearer more attractive. They weren't merely for makeup. They had effects." Sherlock listened without sign, and then, after a moment, began asking more questions, shifting through the details Cho had given, hunting for the clue that made the rest fit. "After you brought the eyeshadow back to your dormitory, did you show it to anyone besides your roommates?" "No, I only showed it to my roommates." "Do you remember exactly where you put it in your dormitory?" "I put it in my vanity box, on the top shelf of the cabinet next to my bed." "Was the cabinet locked?" "No, we never lock it." "Let me confirm again. The last time you saw the eyeshadow was before that potions class?" Cho Chang hesitated a beat. I'm not sure. I can't say whether it was still there before class. It was only after potions finished, and I got back that one of my roommates said she wanted the same cosmetic as an Easter present, and then I discovered it was gone." "Who asked to see the gift?" Alicia, she's a witch from a Muggle family. Cho's eyes widened in surprise. No, Mr. Holmes, she couldn't have done it. Oh, why not? We've lived together since first year. We're very close. When my eyeshadow went missing, they were all very helpful. They'd planned to go home, but they didn't leave. You mean not everyone went home? Alicia and Marietta stayed. Lucy went home, but that doesn't mean anything. She's just as much a friend of mine as the other two. Miss Chang, be careful. If your description includes too many subjective judgments, it will hurt the investigation. Sorry. It's all right. Just answer the questions. Mr. Holmes, what else do you want to know? Lambert, describe your three roommates and their family situations objectively. Cho took a little longer this time. When she finished, Sherlock glanced at Penelope Clearwater. I have enough for now. Head girl, I need your help next. Penelope didn't ask why. Mr. Holmes, go ahead. We need to enter the Ravenclaw common room and preferably Miss Chang's dormitory, if you really want this resolved. Sherlock watched Penelope's face as he spoke, as if reading her. Cho looked at her too, pleading with her eyes. Allowing outsiders into the girls' dormitory was not a simple matter. Ravenclaw's common room wasn't guarded by a password so much as an answer, but the real trick was that the dormitory staircases altered themselves to deny males entrance. Girls could go into boys' dorms freely, boys could not enter girls. It was, as the legend went, because the founders believed girls were more reliable than boys. Sherlock, uninterested in arguing the point, left the logistical difficulty to the female prefect. If Mr. Holmes accepts, I will apply to Professor Flitwick, Penelope said. Hermione and Cho Chang both startled. Is that necessary? Hermione asked. Miss Chang isn't planning to pursue it further. Cho cut in quickly. I think it's necessary. Penelope's eyes were bright. Cho, I know your situation. Your father's gift means a great deal to you, and Ravenclaw's honor must not be sullied. There was something they had not told Sherlock or Hermione. Cho had said her cabinet was unlocked because Ravenclaw students trusted one another. Now that something had vanished, it had caused a stir. Cho hadn't made a scene because she feared it would reflect badly on the house, but word leaked. Ravenclaw prided itself on wisdom, and someone had already deduced the likeliest explanation. It had been taken by one of their own. Even if Cho later said she'd simply misplaced it, many students had already started locking cabinets and putting up protective charms. The message was plain. Ravenclaw was not untouchable. The new first years and Cho's roommates were especially upset. For different reasons, Penelope decided the matter needed a thorough inquiry. An on-site inspection is necessary if permitted. Sherlock looked at her. I suggest, for now, you keep Ravenclaw students away from Miss Chang's dormitory. The fewer people who go in, the less chance the clues are disturbed. Frankly, you should have come to me sooner. The remark made Penelope a little uncomfortable. She'd already done what she could and been unsatisfied with the results. She'd heard of Sherlock through Cho before Christmas, and after learning more about his methods, decided to seek his help. She deflected the criticism. About half of the students went home for Easter. That's fortunate. I'll apply to Professor Flitwick now. Cho, come with me. They left quickly. Sherlock leaned back and asked Hermione, what do you think? I think it was done by someone in Ravenclaw, too, but Cho doesn't seem willing to pursue it. Understandable. For her, truth and friendship are in conflict. You already know who did it? Sherlock smiled faintly. I only have a hypothesis. Cho's description gives us leads, like this Easter egg. He turned the little painted egg in his hand so the smiley face showed to Hermione. Until it's cracked, you don't know what's inside. Be careful with deductions when evidence is limited. You're going into the Ravenclaw common room? Oui, if you're willing to come with me. To accompany the Great Detective? I'd be delighted. Thank you, but I need to step out briefly. If our clients return, please ask them to wait. Where are you going? You'll see soon enough. They hadn't waited long. Penelope and Cho returned in under 10 minutes with Professor Flitwick's permission. Where's Mr. Holmes? They asked, seeing only Hermione in the Great Hall. He'll be back soon, Hermione said honestly. She didn't know where he'd gone either. While they waited, Hermione learned Flitwick was supportive. He would grant access so long as proper supervision was arranged. If a professor intervened directly, it would change the nature of the inquiry, and Flitwick preferred to leave it to more discreet hands when possible. When Sherlock reappeared, he was carrying a cat. The three girls froze. That cat. It can't be. Madame Norris? You recognize her? Sherlock smiled and scratched the cat behind an ear. Madame Norris responded by purring emphatically, "Duong, duong, duong," in Sherlock's arms. The sight left them stunned. Who wouldn't recognize her? Hermione said. Sherlock, you actually managed to take her from Filch. To be precise, borrow. Borrow? Penelope raised an eyebrow. Filch would lend her? It wasn't that she doubted him. It was just difficult to imagine Argus Filch parting with Madame Norris. Sherlock explained coolly. Her digestion was poorly managed. I arranged for suitable food and some anti-flatulent medication from home. The effect was immediate. Filch's gratitude followed Madame Norris's improved behavior. He agreed to lend her for a short time. After the night in the Forbidden Forest, Sherlock had asked his family to send supplies for the cat, treat the symptoms, and Filch's opinion of him had improved by association. Using Madame Norris as a resource for this case was easy enough. And you have Professor Flitwick's permission? Sherlock said, indicating the manuscript peeking from Penelope's robe pocket with a casual glance. I noticed his signature on it. Since we're ready, let's go. Penelope started. It's not polite to call a lady this head girl, Mr. Holmes. My apologies. Compared with Miss Chang, your name is a little hard to remember. Penelope's expression shifted from offended to incredulous. Cho Chang blinked. Hermione leaned closer and lowered her voice, whispering to Penelope, He means because Penelope is shorter than Clearwater, it's easier for him to hold in mind. Then briefly explained Sherlock's odd analogy about memory as a hard drive. Penelope took a breath, decided not to dwell on it, and led them up toward Ravenclaw Tower. The tower was on the west side of the castle. As they walked, Cho peered at Madame Norris and said, surprised, She looks fatter than before. I remember she used to be very thin. Not only that, Hermione added, her dark gray fur looks much shinier. Madame Norris, however, drew back into Sherlock's arms and bared her teeth when Hermione reached out. Hermione froze. Your observation skills are improving, Hermione, Sherlock said, amused. She is healthier. Her stomach problems have been resolved. No wonder Filch trusted you with her. Penelope, walking ahead, called back. How can a cat help us, though? Even in the magical world, never underestimate animals, Sherlock said, still stroking the cat. Madame Norris began to purr again, content. Cats are excellent trackers. Their instincts and sense of smell can provide crucial clues. Aren't dogs usually used for tracking? Hermione asked. I thought their sense of smell was more sensitive. Scotland Yard relies on dogs. That's a common misconception, Sherlock replied. A cat's sense of smell is at least on par with a dog's, sometimes superior. The difference is obedience. Dogs can be trained to follow directions and work for humans. Cats are less compliant. They only apply themselves fully when it suits them. That makes them harder to use, but when motivated, they are incredibly effective. The three girls exchanged looks, another strange piece of information added to their store. They climbed the twisting tower stairs, Penelope leading, Sherlock and Hermione close behind. Madame Norris settled in Sherlock's arms, content, watchful, and perhaps, given the mood, a very useful ally. 95. This Gryffindor really can't talk, Sherlock, and the three others chatted as they walked, soon arriving at the Ravenclaw Tower and climbing to the top floor. In the shadows of the spiral staircase, the bronze door knocker gleamed coldly in the morning light. Ravenclaw's common room didn't use a password. You had to answer the knocker's question correctly to be admitted. Each student got one chance. If you answered wrong, you lost the right to try again. Of course, Ravenclaw always seemed to have someone who could find the right answer. If everyone were baffled, though, that would be amusing. The three young witches didn't know Sherlock was already familiar with the place. This was simply his first time coming openly. The bronze eagle-shaped knocker spoke in a dull voice. Today's question is logic the reflection of the moon or the essence of the lake water? Penelope didn't answer. She looked at Sherlock and Hermione with interest. Part of her wanted to see how Sherlock Holmes, the Gryffindor famed for his reasoning, would reply. Part of her wanted to test him. If he couldn't even get into the common room, how could she expect him to catch a thief? Sherlock, however, pretended to admire the view, looking around without answering. Penelope knew he wasn't avoiding the question out of shyness. He simply didn't care. With Sherlock refusing to respond, Penelope turned to Hermione. Hermione hesitated only a moment. She'd heard of the knocker before and didn't want to be bested in Ravenclaw territory. After thinking through it, she answered, "A reflection needs lake water to exist, but the water doesn't need a reflection to prove it exists, just as wisdom doesn't need logic to prove its own existence." The knocker opened at once. Penelope and Cho Chang looked surprised. They could have answered the riddle, but hadn't expected Hermione to do so quickly. "Miss Granger, you should have been sorted into Ravenclaw," Penelope said, delighted. Hermione shook her head. That question, she now understood why Sherlock had shown no interest. She also had a new sense of why Sherlock hadn't been sorted into Ravenclaw. The common room was similar to Gryffindor's in scale, a large circular space, but its colors were cool blues and bronzes rather than reds and golds. Shimmering silks hung from the walls, arched windows framed the mountain view, and the domed ceiling and deep blue carpet were studded with stars. The dome itself displayed a slowly revolving constellation map. Visually, it was more captivating than the star field you viewed in astronomy. Sherlock glanced up, took it in for a moment, and then looked away. "There's nothing more to see here. Take us to Miss Zhang's dormitory." Penelope nodded. She felt it unlikely that the common room would hold any clues and led Sherlock and Hermione toward Cho's dorm. They moved through the room without drawing much attention until someone suddenly appeared in front of them. "Prefect Clearwater," called a familiar voice. "Michael Corner, didn't you go home?" Penelope peered at the black-haired boy and named him. Michael Corner puffed up a little. "No, I plan to use the holiday to finish the assignments Professor set." "Commendable spirit. Move aside, we have business." "But that's the girls' dormitory," Michael protested, alarmed. "You can't bring a boy in there." Penelope's gaze sharpened. "Michael Corner, are you questioning my authority?" "No, it's just... Mr. Holmes is here with the permission of Professor Flitwick and myself. Now move, or I'll say it again." Michael was only a first year. He'd already used up most of his courage speaking up. Faced with Penelope's look, he stepped back obediently. Sherlock and Hermione walked on as if nothing had happened. Cho gave Michael an apologetic smile and hurried to catch up. Michael didn't stay put for long. He darted off to fetch the other Ravenclaw prefect, Robert Hilliard. By the time he returned with Robert, the stairs leading to the girls' dormitory had turned into a smooth stone slide. No one could get through. Robert's face went pale. "Are you sure Penelope took that Gryffindor boy up to the girls' dorm?" "I saw it with my own eyes. It was Detective Holmes." Robert hesitated, then left to find Professor Flitwick. Inside the dormitory area, Sherlock and his three companions drew attention, mainly because a boy had entered the girls' quarters. Most students looked at them with curiosity and then returned to their tasks. A few came over to question Penelope and left satisfied with her explanation. Only a handful objected like Michael had. When people heard Sherlock was here specifically to help solve Cho Chang's missing cosmetics case, some reacted even more strongly. Thanks to Penelope's authority and Flitwick's backing, the four escaped the worst of it. "The resistance is greater than I expected," Penelope said as she led them on. "Even first years dare to question me." "After all," Hermione added, "we are Gryffindor." "It's a bit ironic," Hermione continued, "that Ravenclaw, the house famous for its wisdom, needs a brainless brute to help." Penelope and Cho exchanged helpless looks. This Gryffindor really didn't know how to pick her words. Sherlock, overhearing, couldn't resist. "Well said, my friend." Penelope and Cho were speechless. Birds of a feather, apparently. They reached Cho's dormitory. As Cho had mentioned, Lucy had gone home for the holiday. Marietta Edgecombe and Alicia Keyes remained. When they saw a boy among them, both reacted like Michael had. "Prefect Penelope, Cho, why is there a boy here? He's not even a Ravenclaw." "Marietta, Alicia, calm down," Cho said. Penelope handled it smoothly, used to this sort of thing. She explained the situation in a few sentences, and the reactions shifted. Marietta frowned and said nothing, while Alicia muttered, "Ravenclaw needing help from Gryffindor. Really? That's enough." Penelope cut her off, worried they might anger Sherlock. She turned to him. "Holmes, you can start." But she didn't have to finish. Sherlock had already begun. On Halloween night, he'd used a magnifying glass and a tape measure to survey a scene and identify bloody writing before Professors McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell arrived. Now, on this Easter morning, the same disciplined method was at work in Ravenclaw's dormitory. His tools had been upgraded. Harry had given him a magnifying glass for Christmas that could also detect magical traces, runes, and unusual fluctuations on magical objects. His ordinary tape measure had been replaced with one from Ollivander's that automatically measured distances. They were basic by Wizarding World standards and would be useless against very powerful spellwork or dark artifacts. But for Sherlock, they bridged Muggle investigative techniques and the magical one. He strode through the room, pausing, squatting, frowning, smiling, inspecting the placement of objects, the texture of a cloth, the faintest smear on a mirror. The Ravenclaw girls exchanged bewildered looks as he moved silently, methodical, and utterly absorbed in the work. "Miss Granger, is he always like this?" Penelope blurted. "He's like this whenever he gets lost in his own head," Penelope's companion replied. Hermione, having already seen some of Sherlock's oddities, reacted far more calmly than the other three Ravenclaws. She had meant to help hunt for clues as Sherlock did, but the moment she took a step, he brusquely halted her. So she stood with the others and watched. Even standing still, she could take in the whole dormitory. The Ravenclaw girls' dormitory occupied the top of the castle's west tower. The domed ceiling held a moving star map. Bronze and deep blue draperies matched the common room. The layout resembled Gryffindor's dormitories, 4-poster beds with flannel curtains, but the cloth was pale blue instead of crimson. Faint starlight slipped through enchanted windows and painted the beds. The bedposts were carved with ravens and scrollwork, and copper wind chimes hung from their heads, chiming softly in the tower breeze. Penelope could hear the tiny, ethereal tinkling. "That's a charm," Penelope explained when Hermione perked an ear. "It turns the founder's words into music." A round walnut table stood at the center of the room, its surface layered with graffiti and rune practice from former students. Self-turning books clustered at its edge beside a steaming teapot of honeyed tea. Cho Chang murmured that her bed was the second by the window. Hermione glanced across and noted how neat it was, light blue sheets smooth as glass, the quilt arranged tidily rather than folded into a stiff block. A small potted magical plant sat on the bedside table, dew glittering on its leaves and giving off a fresh scent. Hermione tried the kind of quick deductions Sherlock made for sport. Cho Chang was tidy, careful, and pleasant. That was all she could confidently say. Sherlock, of course, was already inspecting every item in the room with keen attention. He inspected the walnut table, peered closely at the wind chimes, and even put his magnifying glass to the beds, which made Cho and her roommates flush with embarrassment. Strangely, he didn't ask about who slept in which bed. "Mr. Holmes, do we need to—" "Ah!" Marietta Edgecombe's question died in a scream. Madame Norris, Filch's cat, had appeared at her feet as if from nowhere. "Isn't that Madame Norris?" someone breathed. Madame Norris had, in fact, been inside before Sherlock and the girls arrived. Penelope hadn't noticed. Sherlock had quietly used the three witches who accompanied him to shield their entrance and let the cat slip in. He had expected the cat to appear, and his eyes lingered over it briefly before he turned back to the bedside tables. He opened Cho Chang's bedside table again, and then inspected the others. Marietta and Alicia's faces tightened as he examined. Then he stepped back. "All right, on-site inspection concluded. Ladies, do you mind if I ask a few questions?" He picked up Madame Norris with a small ceremonial bow. Cho's roommates exchanged looks, and when Penelope gave a nod, began to answer. Their recollections matched Cho Chang's. They had seen Cho using the eyeshadow. Both of them and Lucy, who had already gone home for the holiday, had tried the product. The eyeshadow had gone missing after they returned to the dormitory from the final potions class before Easter. Nothing else had seemed unusual. When Sherlock asked Alicia why she'd sought the eyeshadow immediately after returning from potions, her eyes flashed. "Mr. Holmes, are you accusing me? If I'd stolen it, why would I bring it up? That would only draw attention to myself." "Ravenclaws don't steal," Marietta protested with wounded outrage. "Especially not in this dormitory." "Marietta, Alicia, don't," Penelope started to say. Sherlock raised a hand and stopped her. "Ladies, you're a bit touchy." Both girls sniffed. In fact, Sherlock continued insolently, your insistence might be deliberate, reverse psychology, acting flagrantly innocent to throw suspicion off, doing the opposite of what's expected. The statement landed like a slap. They felt as if he had pointed a finger at them. Alicia's chest rose with indignation as she jabbed a finger at Sherlock. Holmes, are you insulting me? You insult us in Ravenclaw, Marietta added. Prefect, we don't need this. You've got it wrong, Sherlock interrupted calmly. The client in this case isn't you, nor Miss Chang. It's head girl Penelope standing there. Holmes, he no longer bothered with them. He turned to Hermione. My dear Hermione, would you do me a favor? Hermione looked puzzled but came forward. Sherlock whispered a few words. She brightened then, after a moment's pause, nodded and hurried out. Penelope began to ask what he'd said, but Sherlock brushed it off with a small smile. Don't worry, I simply asked her to help with a small task. He stroked Madame Norris with ease. Ladies, if you'll permit me, I'd like to invite you to the common room. No more searching? Penelope asked, and the three dormmates mirrored her surprise. Sherlock surveyed their faces, then shook his head slowly. This happened some time ago. Crucial traces have disappeared. Think of a formatted hard drive. Sometimes erased files can be recovered, but if new data is written over them steadily, recovery becomes difficult. Your dormitory has been in continuous use since the incident. The scene was not preserved, and many clues have been overwritten by new activity. Still, I've found something useful. I hope it will help. The four exchanged glances and turned to Penelope. Sherlock smiled faintly. 10 minutes later, they were seated in the Ravenclaw common room. Sherlock sat at the center with Madame Norris curled in his lap, purring. The four girls faced him, as if surrounding a prisoner. Sherlock, apparently unaware of the impression, stroked the cat and spoke in an easy tone. Investigation is taxing, whether in the Muggle world or the magical world. Still, I must thank head girl Penelope for giving me something to occupy my Easter. It kept me from being bored. At once the girls' faces changed. They were Ravenclaws. They understood nuance. Penelope, impatient, cut to the chase. Holmes, do you mean you finished? That depends what you mean by finished, he said. Do you mean finding Miss Chang's missing eyeshadow, catching the person who took it, or both? His gaze flicked over the group, and their expressions shifted again. The cool blue of the common room seemed to chill a degree or two. So it was deliberate, Penelope said at last, voice tight. Sherlock laughed softly. I thought that was already clear. Could it really be that Miss Chang simply forgot it somewhere? All right, Penelope said, drawing a breath. Tell us everything, Mr. Holmes. Wait, Alicia spoke up before he could continue. You used the hard drive example to say you hadn't found many clues, so why are you suddenly so confident now? Don't try to be mysterious. Sherlock met her gaze without annoyance, as if expecting the interruption, and prepared to answer. 97. The criminal shows up. I never resort to theatrics, Sherlock said, glancing at the four Ravenclaw girls with something like regret. A good deal of the clues were wiped away, but the thief overestimated her own abilities. You have already given me enough information, and I have examined the scene thoroughly. It would be strange if I still couldn't deduce what happened in this dormitory. At that, the three girls present felt the weight of his confidence. First, he continued, Ravenclaw's common room is unique. You enter and exit by answering the knocker's riddle. On the surface, that seems less secure than a fixed password, but it isn't. Many witches and wizards lack skill in logical deduction, so requiring an answer filters out students from other houses. Even if someone from another house could answer correctly and get in, they would often be recognized. It's not an absolute lock, but it does make an internal suspect more likely. Second, before this incident, the Ravenclaw students' lockers were unlocked. The girls' faces darkened. The old certainty, Ravenclaw was safe, suddenly felt less absolute. Fixed storage locations, unlocked lockers, and Cho Chang's predictable routine all made it easy for a thief. My inspection found no signs of forced entry on the locker, because there was no need for them. If I had been Cho's roommate, there are at least 7 ways I could have taken the ebony box without her noticing. By the time Cho realized the eyeshadow was missing, any trace would have been exhausted. Even another investigator would have found nothing. That is precisely what the thief counted on, and what she did. Penelope couldn't help interrupting. Mr. Holmes, are you saying the eyeshadow wasn't taken when Cho went to potions? Of course not, Sherlock said, glancing at Alicia Keys with a half smile. If it had been Miss Keys, you could have been cleared immediately. Alicia Keys sprang up. Are you accusing me of taking Cho's eyeshadow? Marietta Edgecombe didn't stand, but her look was anything but polite. This is slander. What great detective? Holmes, you're a fraud, an absolute charlatan. Miss Keys, please calm down, Sherlock said, as composed as ever. Although the eyeshadow had already left Cho's locker before you discovered it, it was your attempt to check the locker that upset the thief. She had expected Cho wouldn't notice until after the Easter holidays. Alicia Keys and Marietta exchanged glances. Then Marietta, frowning, murmured, Could it be? No. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Marietta, what's impossible? Alicia demanded. Nothing. I must have been overthinking. Marietta forced a smile. Before the holidays, I heard Lucy whispering, Why does she have such good stuff? But I thought she was talking about Gemma Farley's Felix Felicis. I heard Gemma did very well in Professor Snape's potions and got a small bottle as a reward. Lucy's always been jealous. Snape favors Slytherins. Even if the rest of us did as well, we don't get rewarded. Sometimes not losing points is his mercy. Penelope, Cho, and Alicia nodded. Edgecombe's suggestion had planted a seed of suspicion, one that might grow if tended right. She did not expect it to be uprooted so quickly. Sherlock! Hermione's voice came from the doorway of the common room. She leaned against the frame, breathless and flushed, but eyes bright with excitement. My dear friend, it seems you really needed to do something more active. Sherlock surveyed her for a moment and chuckled. You found it? Hermione nodded emphatically and took a steadying breath. As you expected. Excellent. Splendid. Sherlock turned to the 4 Ravenclaw girls. That's enough. They all looked surprised. Penelope asked, bewildered. Mr. Holmes, what do you mean, enough? Amateur theatrics, pathetic motives, clumsy actions. I didn't expect you'd still try to be clever now, Sherlock sighed. Ravenclaw's wisdom can't always contend with the thorns that grow in someone's heart, can it, Miss Marietta Edgecombe? Penelope, Cho, and Alicia gasped. All 3 turned to Marietta in disbelief. Confronted by her prefect, her roommate, and a friend, Marietta looked flustered. Mr. Holmes, I don't understand. Miss Edgecombe, you don't need that innocent look. Sherlock's patience had thinned. Hermione's arrival had completed his picture, so he put his cards on the table. The moment I first saw you, I knew Cho's eyeshadow was in your possession. You're slandering me. Marietta stood up, eyes glassy as if on the verge of tears. The others' faces showed varying doubt, but only Hermione looked openly scornful. Sherlock's earlier remarks had already given her a clear assessment of the girl. Sherlock shook his head gently. Before I knew about the magical world, I could infer a person's thoughts from fleeting expressions, eye movements, tiny muscle twitches. I could tell a man was a software designer from his tie, a pilot from his hands. Fortunately, that skill transfers here. He met their skeptical looks, smiled faintly, and fixed his gaze on Marietta. Even more fortunately, you are not a convincing liar. The moment I saw you, I knew you were hiding something. Cho's missing item was in your hands. Then he turned to Penelope, bright-eyed. Miss Penelope, I can formally tell you, mission accomplished. Marietta Edgecombe, standing beside you, is the one who took Cho Chang's eyeshadow. Silence stretched before Penelope found her voice. Mr. Holmes, I truly don't understand. Even Penelope, known for her level-headedness, was bewildered by the speed and certainty of Sherlock's deductions. It's all over now, Sherlock said. If you have questions, ask them. I won't refuse to answer. Penelope looked at Marietta, then drew a breath. You said you knew it was Marietta the moment you saw her. How could you tell? The false sympathy on her face was an insult to me, Sherlock said with contempt. When I questioned her, she tried to appear calm, but her eyes darted like a cat that has stolen fish and is terrified of being caught. When I spoke with Miss Keys, she insisted Ravenclaw students wouldn't steal. She's not the type to posture about house honor. The moment I mentioned there were 7 ways to take the eyeshadow, Marietta's breathing quickened. That physiological reaction is a confession in itself. She hadn't noticed her fingers rubbing her cuff. Classic anxiety. All eyes followed Sherlock's glance. Marietta hastily lowered her right hand. Do you think I'm blind? Do you think you can fool everyone? She spat. Sherlock leaned in, voice low and cold. Your biggest mistake wasn't taking the eyeshadow. It was thinking you could deceive me. From the moment we met, your body was telling me one thing with all its might. You are a clumsy thief, and an even clumsier liar. Marietta's face drained of color. 98. The truth has come to light under Sherlock's condescending stare. Marietta Edgecombe's fragile composure began to crumble. She was only 13, after all. No one expected a child to endure the relentless questioning of someone like Sherlock Holmes. She finally burst into a hysterical shriek. What expression? What look? What anxiety? That's all your speculation. You have no proof. Heh, your reaction isn't slow, Sherlock said mildly. Of course, if I concluded you were guilty based only on that, I'd despise myself. He gave a short, amused chuckle. Miss Chang, please close the common room door. If anyone comes, tell them to wait a moment. Miss Penelope, keep an eye on Miss Edgecombe, and if you can, restrain her movement with a charm. Miss Abbott, help Miss Chang make sure we aren't disturbed. Don't worry, I'll finish this quickly. He returned to his seat, fixed his gaze on the stricken Edgecombe, and spoke slowly. This is my first case since I arrived in the magical world, and it matters to me. It's simpler than you think, simple enough to be instructive. Simple? Hermione blurted. The others, including Miss Chang and Marietta, stared in disbelief. Yes, very simple. Beyond that, no better word comes to mind. Sherlock smiled at their surprise. Think about it. With only a little help from a friend and some straightforward deduction, I caught the culprit in a single day. That shows this case was fundamentally uncomplicated. If you put it that way, Hermione mused. She had expected Sherlock to spend days, perhaps a week. Anything that looks or sounds unusual is usually a clue. The crucial skill is backward reasoning, working from effect to cause. It's extremely useful and not as difficult as people think, but few practice it. In both the Muggle and magical worlds, people prefer forward reasoning, so analytical deduction is rare. Here, among wizards, very few can reason thoroughly in that analytical way. I'm not the culprit, Marietta snapped. You have no evidence. You want evidence? Sherlock looked at her with cool contempt. I'll give it to you now. Penelope and two prefects held Marietta so she could not bolt. Sherlock paced a few steps in the Ravenclaw common room and began to lay out his case. The second bed by the window, the one with light blue curtains embroidered with silver cloud patterns, belongs to Miss Chang. On the bedside table is a potted magical plant. I opened the cabinet and found the missing sandalwood box had been on the third shelf. The cabinet wasn't locked, but a trace of sandalwood clung to the keyhole, mingled with the scent of the herbal sachets scattered inside. For Madame Norris, that would have been obvious. On the bed next to Miss Chang's, there's a dressing mirror inlaid with malachite. The frame's edge is engraved with A.E., the abbreviation for the Edgecombe family. So that is Marietta's bed. I also noticed a tiny crack in the mirror where a silvery dust shimmered, flue powder. That alone might mean nothing. Mrs. Edgecombe works at the Flue Network Management Office, after all, but coupled with other details, it suggested a motive. Sherlock paused to watch Edgecombe's face, then continued. The other two beds are almost obsessively tidy, parchment sorted by date, quill tips kept sharp, very Ravenclaw. Still, the crooked corner of the quibbler peeking from beneath one bed was incongruous. No wonder you didn't ask who owns the beds, Cho Chang said, suddenly understanding. Basic deduction. Sherlock held up 3 fingers. There are 3 pieces of evidence that prove the culprit. They leaned in. First, the charm. With a magical magnifying glass, I found faint magical traces on Miss Chang's vanity box and on the copper wind chimes hanging by her bed. As the owner, Miss Chang wouldn't need to cast a charm to open her own box, or her sandalwood eyeshadow box. The wind chimes, being musical magical items, would never be used for practice. The simplest explanation is that someone else cast a charm on those objects, probably to mask the sound of the chimes and to hide the act of opening the box. The most suitable spell for that is Confundo. It's difficult, requires concentration on a single target, and is hard for students, but if you charm a stationary object, it's easier. Even so, a second-year student would likely need several attempts to succeed, which is why traces were left. Sherlock leaned forward, supporting his chin with his hands, and turned to Penelope. Miss Penelope, with your skill, you should be able to perform prior incantato easily, yes? Penelope nodded confidently, then cast it on Miss Edgecombe's wand. Marietta's face drained of color. Marietta, hand over your wand. Head girl Penelope, would you trust an outsider over me? Marietta snapped. Hand it over. Abbott intervened and snatched Marietta's wand, which Penelope immediately took. She aimed it and spoke the incantation. A shimmering golden thread shot from her wand to Marietta's. It split into hundreds of arcs and braided into a delicate dome of light. Penelope worked the charm with practiced ease. Hermione watched with envy. When the glow faded, Penelope was silent for a heartbeat, then said, Confundo was indeed cast, more than once. Marietta, Cho cried, covering her mouth. You must believe me. Marietta snapped, glaring at Sherlock. I used Confundo because I've been practicing charms alone. Confundo's difficulty is exactly what I needed to work on my control. How is that a crime? Don't be hasty, Miss Edgecombe. That's only the first piece of evidence. Sherlock raised a finger and went on. Second, the scent. The eyeshadow was stored with herbal sachets on the bedside table and had absorbed the sandalwood scent. That's why Madame Norris noticed it. Your spell work is clumsy. Madame Norris picked up the trail easily. Why did the cat come to your feet just now? You wouldn't think it likes you. It found a tiny drop of liquid, glittering with tiny lights on the corner of that walnut table. Miss Chang's description matches. It was the golden eyeshadow from the 7-color palette. Perhaps you were nervous, perhaps excited, but you tested the eyeshadow in the dormitory. Sherlock shook his head. That cat thinks less of you than I do. Edgecombe had no answer. Sherlock pressed on. You can still argue all this proves nothing, but that brings us to the third piece of evidence. He stood. Miss Chang, you may open the door. Cho nodded and opened the common room door. A throng of Ravenclaws had gathered outside, but they fell back as Penelope glanced over them. Only one tall boy remained, Robert Hilliard, the other Ravenclaw prefect. He brightened when he saw Penelope. Penelope, she cut him off. Not now, she said sharply and made a small sign for them to precede her. Sherlock shrugged and led the way. Hermione followed. Cho Chang and Miss Abbott flanked Marietta. Marietta saw Robert Hilliard and moved to speak. Penelope, quick as always, flicked her wand. Tongue-tying charm. Marietta's lips moved, but no sound came out. Robert's face darkened. Penelope, you shouldn't cast offensive charms on younger students. You'll understand why after this is over, she said, and quickened her pace to catch up with Sherlock. Marietta had been planning to appeal to Robert. Placing her at the rear prevented any mishap. They returned to the girls' dormitory. Sherlock, walking ahead as if casually, said, It seems Miss Penelope has already gotten rid of your admirer. That's right. Wait, how did you? Penelope was taken aback. Few people knew of Hilliard's infatuation with her. How could Sherlock have noticed? Just look at his robes, Sherlock replied briskly. His collar is ironed so sharply it could cut, and his cuffs are perfumed. No Ravenclaw prefect needs to dress like that unless he wants attention. When Miss Chang opened the door, he glanced at you 27 times and at me not once, even though I'm involved in the case. His pupils dilated when you turned. The corners of his mouth twitched. That's basic physiological response when one is attracted. And your manner around him, you avoided his gaze like one avoids a lobalug. You never looked him directly in the eye. He smiled. Consider this case a blessing. It gives you a perfect excuse to avoid this admirer. Mr. Holmes, I now believe you suspected her the moment you saw her, Penelope said. Sherlock said nothing, but he smiled more plainly. Penelope inhaled once, then asked, Now show us the third piece of evidence. Sherlock released Madame Norris, and the cat darted straight to Marietta's bedside table, pawing at the cabinet door as if it had been waiting days for that spot. Everyone else watched, surprised. Sherlock pointed to the corner of the walnut table. A small drop of golden-colored solid sat there, the eyeshadow, now congealed. It really is my golden eyeshadow, Cho exclaimed. Hermione glanced at Marietta, who looked stunned, as if she no longer cared. Sherlock approached Marietta's cabinet. As he'd said, the mirror on the table was inlaid with malachite and stamped with the initials A.E. A hairline crack in the glass glittered with flue powder. Sherlock tapped the cabinet with his wand, and the cat jumped aside. The door opened to reveal clothing at the bottom, books and notebooks, and a few plain cosmetics on the shelves, but no sandalwood box. Everyone exchanged looks. Penelope hesitated, then cast a simple charm to remove the tongue-tying from Marietta. "Where is it?" she demanded. She fixed Marietta with a stare. "Where did you hide it?" Edgecombe laughed, or at least tried to. She looked at Sherlock with a mocking tilt to her mouth. "Shouldn't you be asking our Detective Holmes that?" "Detective Holmes, didn't you say Filch's cat could find it with its claws? Now tell me, where is the thing I stole? Or has someone else, under confundo again, taken it away?" 99. You gave too much. Facing Marietta Edgecombe's aggressive outburst, Cho Chang felt both relief and worry. Relief because Sherlock's mistake seemed likely. Her friend had done nothing wrong. Worry because, if Sherlock was wrong, he'd lose face. Alicia, aloof and curious, just wanted to watch the spectacle. Only Hermione and Penelope were certain Marietta was the culprit. Hermione trusted Sherlock implicitly and had just found corroborating evidence. Penelope trusted her own eyes. Marietta's earlier odd behavior already looked like a confession. Yet both women frowned at Marietta's current nonchalance. Where had things gone wrong? Sherlock regarded Marietta as if she were missing the obvious. "If you'd had a little more patience, you wouldn't have asked such a stupid question." Following his gaze, everyone noticed Madame Norris tapping at the bottom of the cabinet with her paws, producing a hollow thud. Could it be? The girls' thoughts converged. Penelope hurried to the nightstand and cast a revealing charm on the spot the cat had been patting. Revelio. A hidden drawer sprang open from the base of the cabinet. It's a secret compartment, enchanted with an extension charm. "Oh my God, that's my sandalwood box!" Cho Chang and Hermione exclaimed at once. Penelope frowned, reached into the secret drawer, took out the box, opened it, and handed it to Cho Chang. Inside, 7 porcelain pans, each a different hue from deep blue to rose, sat in a sandalwood grid carved with plum, orchid, bamboo, and chrysanthemum motifs, as if the 4 seasons of Jiangnan had been condensed into an inch. It matched Cho's earlier description exactly. "The gold is used more than the others," Cho said, "and it's the newest." Sherlock inspected the box and pronounced, "A subtly shimmering gold eyeshadow, used in social settings, draws attention and makes the wearer more alluring." Hermione then remembered Cho's apparently trivial details and pressed, "Marietta, why?" Cho Chang looked at Marietta with pity and hurt. "We were the best of friends. If you liked it, I could have asked my father to buy another." Marietta's expression went cold. Whatever false sympathy had been there vanished. "It's come to this. I have nothing to say." "Say something. Give us a reason," Cho demanded. "If I said I was just curious and took it to play with for a few days, would you believe me?" Marietta snapped. Cho hesitated. "If that were true, you could have told me." Keith grew agitated. "You didn't just take it. You hid it with a charm and used an extension charm to conceal it." "If you want motive, I can explain," Sherlock interjected. Alicia stared at him. "You knew that?" Sherlock looked to Hermione. "Hermione, read the items I asked you to find." Hermione nodded and produced a stack of clippings. The Daily Prophet, March 27th. Mrs. Edgecombe was once again commended for her work on flu network reform. Minister for Magic Cornelius Fudge presented the award. This marks the 7th commendation Mrs. Edgecombe has received in the past year. The Department of Magical Transportation and the Flu Network Authority repeatedly praised her contributions to monitoring and managing the flu network. The rest was more of the same, glowing evaluations of Mrs. Edgecombe. The girls began to see Sherlock's point. Hermione continued, "Marietta's potions grades aren't outstanding, but they're usually acceptable. Lately, they've dropped significantly. Coincidentally, Professor Snape's recent essay topic was the fragility of familial magical contracts." "Thank you, Hermione," Sherlock said. He turned back to Marietta. "Miss Chang mentioned that your mother works at the Ministry of Magic and is far busier than Miss Chang's father. You once complained to her, not all parents remember to give gifts to their children." Miss Chang remembered the line, but didn't connect it to anything else. Put that together with the prophet's reports. Your mother is a workaholic. "I suspect you suffered from a psychological imbalance caused by long-term neglect, envied the attention Cho received from her father, and stole the eyeshadow to express that resentment. The decline in potions grades supports this." "Marietta, is that true?" Cho's voice trembled. The hand holding the sandalwood box shook. Marietta looked at her without answering. Envy is more pitiable than theft because it cannot be returned. At that, Marietta broke down. Yes, I did it! She snatched the sandalwood box from Cho and smashed it to the floor. Cho didn't react fast enough, but Penelope uttered a swift, sharp charm, one the others later whispered was forbidden, and stopped the pans from scattering. Marietta's sobs startled the owl on the windowsill. Cho stood frozen, staring at her friend's contorted face. She remembered Marietta's trembling fingers as she had fondled the eyeshadow, and the way Marietta had always said, Cho always gets the best things. Perhaps their friendship had already been dying long before the eyeshadow was missing. Let's go, Hermione. There's nothing more for us here. Head girl Penelope will handle it, Cho said. Sherlock, who had foreseen this outcome, muttered once more. The wisdom of Ravenclaw still can't overcome the thorns that grow wild inside a heart. Brilliant. Truly brilliant. Penelope's voice was dry. That evening at dinner, when Hermione recounted Sherlock's investigation into the 7-color eyeshadow theft, Harry and Ron couldn't help but exclaim. Harry, drained and irritated by Quidditch practice with wood, watched Hermione sitting beside Sherlock with a flash of envy. If he'd gone to practice, he'd have been sitting there instead. Ron, less subtle, declared, Sherlock, you're inconsiderate. Next time, call us. I think your actual goal is the Ravenclaw girls' dormitory, isn't it? Hermione snapped. Do I look like that kind of person? Ron protested, but I've never actually been in a girls' dormitory. Hermione rolled her eyes. Harry asked, worried, how will Ravenclaw punish the girl who stole? Expulsion? He had been half sure since the start of term that a serious rule breach might get him expelled, and sometimes imagined Dumbledore making an exception and letting him work for Hagrid instead. Ron scoffed. No way. The punishment for theft is usually points and detention, maybe calling the parents. Harry breathed out in relief, and then noticed both Ron and Sherlock watching the entrance. 2 figures were walking toward their table, past the Ravenclaw blue and silver curtain. Sherlock's fingers tapped twice on the oak. They arrived sooner than I expected, he said. Looks like Ravenclaw has made a decision. Penelope and Cho Chang reached their table. Harry and Ron didn't know Penelope, but her Ravenclaw prefect badge, neat and similar to Percy's, told them who she was. Young, capable, and striking. Their attention, though, drifted to Cho. Her long black hair was loosely pinned with a sandalwood hairpin. A few strands brushed her neck and swayed as she moved. Harry's fingers tightened around his knife. He remembered her smile at Christmas and how it had stuck with him. Now, with a few freckles like stardust on her nose and a faint melancholy in her eyes, she seemed both familiar and new. Merlin's beard, Ron muttered to Harry, nudging him. Your ears are red. Penelope didn't notice them. She reached into her bag and produced a galleon. Mr. Holmes, this is our commission fee. Ron hastily diverted his gaze. His family's vault contained at most a galleon or two. The ease with which Ravenclaw produced money surprised him. Sherlock hesitated. You're giving too much. Mr. Holmes, you upheld Ravenclaw's reputation. Penelope began, then looked at Cho. Cho pushed a small silk packet embroidered with Lifang pagoda patterns toward Sherlock. This is Westlake Longjing, my father brought from Hangzhou. And please don't disclose the details of the case, Penelope said quietly, then glanced at Harry and Ron. Same goes for Mr. Potter and Mr. Weasley. For once, Sherlock accepted the gifts. He smiled faintly. Ravenclaw's pride maintained by hush money, then. No, it's not that, Cho said quickly, almost too softly. Marietta has already been punished. I just don't want her to be pointed at anymore. Her voice was small and earnest. Harry felt something scramble through his ribs like a troop of unruly bowtruckles. Mr. Potter? When Cho Chang addressed Harry, he jumped up so quickly he knocked over his pumpkin juice. The deep orange liquid fanned across the tablecloth. Sorry, he stammered, grabbing a napkin and scrubbing at the spill. Sherlock watched him with mild amusement. Do I need to remind you, Harry? You're wiping my sleeve, he said calmly. Hermione sighed while Ron burst into laughter. Cho made a small choking noise and then, with a faint smile, tapped the table with her wand. Scourgify. The cloth and Sherlock's sleeve were instantly spotless. Hermione's eyes narrowed. Cho's charm was deft, not a whit inferior to her own. Harry didn't notice the charm. His gaze had been caught by a silver cloud pattern glimmering on Cho's cuff, and it took him a moment to look away. That little commotion broke the remaining strain between them. Penelope, Clearwater, and Cho took seats nearby. Sherlock glanced at Cho, then asked quietly, "What's the punishment for Edgecombe?" Cho's brief smile vanished. In a low voice, she replied, "Return of the items, payment of fines. Ravenclaw will lose 50 points, noted only as Marietta. She will stay at school during the holidays and after hours doing physical work without magic. She will have restrictions on where she can go in public for a time." "Don't be soft," Sherlock said dismissively. "Her actions were her own. She doesn't deserve pity. Your relationship with her won't go back to how it was before, but Miss Edgecombe is a friend worth keeping." Cho nodded. The incident had clarified much for her. They talked for a while longer and grew steadily more comfortable. Near the end of the meal, Penelope cleared her throat. "Mr. Holmes, this stays between us, yes?" "I'm not interested," Sherlock said. "Nor am I," Cho added. "Don't worry, I won't say anything," Hermione promised. "Me neither," Ron chimed in. After the girls left, Ron sighed happily. "She's really lovely and kind-hearted. Even after everything, she still worries about her friend. Don't you think, Harry?" Harry flushed. He'd been a little too quick to judge earlier, and Ron's look made it plain. Thankfully, Ron's attention soon drifted to the food. It was Easter. The Great Hall's feast was richer than usual, and Ron went at it with 2 chicken legs in hand. Harry, having almost exhausted himself on the Quidditch pitch, found it easy to join in. Sherlock and Hermione were correspondingly tired after their work on the case. All 4 ate and talked, and the hall rang with easy chatter. The first day of the Easter holiday passed quietly. Once Sherlock had fulfilled Penelope and Cho's request, the rest of the holiday felt strangely dull. One could not expect to have a case every day, otherwise Hogwarts would be more like Azkaban, but Professor's assignments kept cutting into his time. Professor McGonagall, in particular, paid close attention to Sherlock in Transfiguration. His essays were always a few inches longer than everyone else's, which meant more work for him. Harry's plan for nighttime wanderings of the castle was thwarted again by Oliver Wood's Quidditch drills. The twins could not fathom how Wood found so much energy for training while preparing for his OLs, but once he arrived at the pitch, he was inexhaustible. "Before we start training, I want everyone to call out their name and position. I want full spirit every day. Begin. Chaser, Angelina Johnson. Good. Next. Beater, George Weasley. Loudly. I can't hear you. Beater, George Weasley. Better. Next. Beater, Fred Weasley. You're whispering. You want to win the cup whispering? Again." The pep talks before each session were exhausting enough. Worse was that Wood ignored weather. Rain or shine, they trained. The Gryffindor team returned from the pitch bone-tired each evening. It wasn't until Madame Pomfrey intervened, after the hospital wing received a dozen punishingly stimulating potions, that Wood's regimen was finally curtailed. From that day forward, the players regarded Madame Pomfrey as their savior. Ron wasn't put through Wood's same intensity, but Professor McGonagall's assignments alone wore him out, especially when paired with Sherlock and Hermione's help. By the end of the holiday, both Harry and Ron agreed it had been more tiring than a normal term. Sherlock and Hermione fared better. With Harry's training finished, the Lion, the Savior, and the Know-It-All trio returned to long hours in the library. Ron did not. Reading and writing were beyond him unless he copied, which he often did. Sherlock was indifferent to Ron's choices. Harry and Hermione were frustrated, but Ron did manage to learn his spells under Sherlock's guidance, which was something. On the first Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson after Easter, Professor Quirrell returned. He looked worse than before the break, more hunched, paler. Seamus, who had asked Sherlock to predict Quirrell's return, gave Sherlock a quiet thumbs up when he spotted him. "You were right." Sherlock sat by the window in the second-to-last row. Harry was beside him. Ron and Neville were in front, Seamus and Dean behind. "That deduction was very simple," one of them muttered. Ron leaned back to ask, "Can you deduce why he's in such poor health this time?" "I said last time I stabbed him with a sword," Sherlock replied without a change of expression. For a second, the class was stunned. Then laughter broke out. "Holmes, how long are you going to keep that joke? If it's true, I'll have no excuse not to be single until I'm 20. Ha!" "Quiet, you lot," Hermione snapped across the aisle. Even if Quirrell seemed an easy target, He was still a professor. Moreover, he was Voldemort's servant. They needed to be careful. Seamus, not wanting to be daunted, stood up before the lesson began and went to ask Quirrell himself about his health. Harry's stomach dropped. He knew the man in that classroom was the same crawling figure they'd met in the Forbidden Forest. If Sherlock had claimed to have stabbed him, it was likely true. Sherlock's composure gave Harry no comfort. Seamus returned with the answer. The vampiric curse under Quirrell's turban had flared up, and he required rest to keep it under control. The garlic in the turban seemed stronger than ever. Harry could not focus through the rest of the class. At lunch in the common room, Ron noticed. "You're distracted all day. What's wrong?" "Quirrell's back," Harry said flatly. Ron shrugged. "Well, I'll give it to McGonagall. She's a lot more competent than Quirrell, at least. She can actually teach." He flicked his wand idly at Sherlock. "Expelliarmus!" The tea leaves in Sherlock's hand didn't even tremble. Sherlock looked at Ron with faint annoyance. "If you're going to cast Expelliarmus at me, make the wand movement smaller next time." Ron rubbed his nose, embarrassed, and turned to Harry. "I know you don't think much of him, but you can't expect the old bat to teach 2 classes forever, can you? Even if Sherlock and Hermione score boatloads of points in other subjects, that won't change things."